Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Zoom webinar that is also being live streamed through YouTube. I'm Yoon Jung Choi, Director of Center for ASEAN and Indian Studies at the Sejong Institute. I would like to say once again, welcome to all of you. Before we get started, let me first introduce the topic of today's seminar. Today, we'll be talking about ways to consolidate and expand ASEAN and Republic of Korea's partnership in the Indo-Pacific era. To do so, we will first identify convergencies and complementarities in the two actors' understanding of Indo-Pacific region in session 1. After that, session 2 will discuss Indo-Pacific strategies of other key partners in the region, such as the US, the EU, and India. Session 3 is an open discussion building on the previous two sessions where all participants are actively encouraged to share their discussions, insights shared through session 1 and 2 on future potentials and challenges for ASEAN and ROK's cooperation with partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. There will be a 15-minute short break around 2:45 p.m. between session 1 and 2. And we plan to start wrapping up at about 4:45 and finish around 5 p.m. Shortly, we will begin session opening remarks and keynote speech before going into session 1. And unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be taking any questions from the floor today. But instead of having a Q&A session, the presentations and discussions from today's seminar will be later published as a project book. So the book will be available on the website of the Korea Foundation and the Sejong Institute later. We would like to ask our guest speakers and discussants today to kindly contribute to making a meaningful and informative project book. For speakers and discussants through Zoom, please make sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking. And when it is your turn to speak, please make sure both your camera and microphone is turned on. Now, without further ado, I would like to invite Gin Lee, the president of the Korea Foundation, for his opening remarks. Gin Lee, please.
His Excellency Ambassador Ong Keng-yong, His Excellency Ambassador Jo Byung-jae, President Lee Sang-hyun, distinguished participants and friends from all over the world, on behalf of the Korea Foundation, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome all of you to the Korea Foundation Sejong ASEAN-ROK Partnership Seminar. Even though it is very unfortunate that we cannot meet in person again this year due to the COVID-19, it is still wonderful to have the opportunity to gather virtually. The global significance of ASEAN is growing by the day, and so are its relations with the Republic of Korea. Keeping that in mind, our government has deepened their strategic partnership with the ASEAN member nations over the past 4 years under the new Southern policy. In fact, even in this pandemic era, an advanced version of this initiative, the new Southern Policy Plus, was announced, taking our partnership with ASEAN to the next level. In tandem with these efforts, the Korea Foundation has run the ASEAN Culture House since 2017. The ASEAN Culture House was established as one of the key outcomes of the 2014 ASEAN-ROK commemorative summit in Busan. It serves as a lively platform to enhance Koreans' understanding of the cultures and societies of ASEAN countries and promote mutual awareness between the peoples of ASEAN and Korea. It is my belief that the ASEAN Culture House stands as a bridge between Korea and the countries of ASEAN, representing the faith and friendship shared between us. Over the past 3 decades, our partnership has indeed expanded by leaps and bounds. Last week, President Moon Jae-in participated in a series of ASEAN-related summits, demonstrating the achievements we have made together through the new Southern policy and our will to strengthen our cooperation. As you can imagine, policies like this one impact not only the countries directly involved, but also other key partners and neighbors. Therefore, in regard to the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region, I think the topic of today's seminar, ASEAN-ROK partnership in the Indo-Pacific era, consolidation and expansion, is particularly well-timed and suitable. Distinguished speakers and guests, by sharing valuable information and exchanging honest views through this seminar, I hope that we will broaden our understanding of one another and build a stronger network between ASEAN and Korea. I look forward to your active and substantive discussions, which will no doubt contribute to this goal. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to the Sejong Institute for their dedication in organizing this seminar. Please also allow me to thank our distinguished participants present today. I hope to meet you in person in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your warm welcoming remarks. Now I will pass the mic to Dr. Sang-Yeon Lee, the president of the Sejong Institute. Dr. Lee, please. 네? Please unmute yourself, Dr. Lee. We can't hear. 다 안 들리시죠? Dr. Lee.
Okay. Yeah. You can hear me now. Okay, it is my pleasure and honor to give an opening remarks for this year's ASEAN-ROK seminar supported by the Korea Foundation. As Dr. Che already mentioned, the main theme of this seminar is ASEAN-ROK partnership in the Indo-Pacific era. Well, we all know that Indo-Pacific is emerging as a center of global politics recently and is becoming an increasingly important region of the world. Let's look at some of the key defining factors for the current global security landscape. We still have a COVID-19 everywhere with a global economic downturn and worsening US-China strategic competition. I think the combined effect of all these factors is a systemic fragmentation or troubling global governance, which demands proactive multilateral cooperation in both global and regional agenda. If you look at the Indo-Pacific region, this is a main competing ground between US Indo-Pacific strategy on the one hand, and China's Belt and Road Initiative on the other hand. Other than that, we see recently Quad and Quad Plus and even AUKUS in one side, and China's expanding maritime assertiveness in the other side. I think one important reason for this systemic fragmentation is a missing global leadership. Although US President Joe Biden said that America is back, but we don't see much evidence that it is back to the center of global leadership. China is not yet ready to take over global leadership either. That's exactly the reason that ASEAN and South Korea needs to expand cooperation in many important issues of common concerns. Well, as Dr. Egan mentioned, Moon Jae-in government is pursuing New Southern Policy and New Southern Policy Plus. It shares with ASEAN countries that to have a free and open Indo-Pacific, ASEAN and ROK should cooperate to create a safe, prosperous, and dynamic region. On top of such a vision, ROK reaffirmed the support for ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led regional architecture. ASEAN and ROK have many issues of common concerns. Regional coordination on law enforcement, cybersecurity, maritime security, public health, and promoting a green recovery, just to name a few. I indeed hope that today's seminar offers a valuable opportunity to share our vision and insights to make Indo-Pacific a better place to live in and co-prosper. Once again, I appreciate the Korea Foundation, particularly President Lee Gun, for generous support for this year's seminar. I welcome many distinguished experts from both Korea and ASEAN countries, including Ambassador Ong Keng-yong, Honorable Cho Byung-jae, who will serve as a chairpersons. And I appreciate Dr. Choi Yun-jung and Sejong staff who worked hard to organize this conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your very encouraging remarks. Now it is my honor to invite His Excellency Ambassador Ong Keng-yong. As we all know, he is Executive Deputy Chairman of the Rajaratnam School of International Studies at the Nanyang Technological University in Singapore since November 2014. Currently, he is also Ambassador at Large in the Singapore Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Singapore's non-resident High Commissioner to Pakistan and non-resident Ambassador to Iran. He was High Commissioner of Singapore to Malaysia, and he was also Secretary General of ASEAN, based in Jakarta, from January 2003 to January 2008. So he will take the chair for our first session, titled How ASEAN and ROK Understand the Indo-Pacific Convergences and Complementarities. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation to the Korea Foundation and to the Sejong Institute for organizing this very timely seminar online to acquaint all our participants and our audience on what is happening in ASEAN and the Republic of Korea. We just heard Dr. Lee Gun from the Korea Foundation and Dr. Lee Sang-yung from the Sejong Institute. So we will now proceed with session 1 of this seminar, and I'd like to focus on ASEAN and ROK understand the Indo-Pacific, and we are talking about convergence and complementarities. In the light of the ongoing competition and rivalry between China and the United States of America, as well as the various pressure on promoting and strengthening regional multilateralism, I hope that our discussion in this session will highlight on the opportunities for cooperation and collaboration between ASEAN and the Republic of Korea, in short, ROK. Today we have 2 presenters and several speakers and discussants. So the first speaker will be Professor Dr. Lee Jae-yong. I think most of you already know him, but he is Senior Fellow, ASEAN and Oceania Studies Center, ASEAN Institute for Policy Studies. Then after that, we will have the other speakers coming on. I will briefly introduce them when they come on to speak. So let's proceed with our speaker, and we will try to move things according to our scheduled time. We don't have much time, by the way. Yeah, so I urge all speakers to keep their time well and wrap up as soon as you are near the end of your allotted slot. Okay, Dr. Lee Jae-yong, maybe let's start the ball rolling for our first section. Over to you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ambassador Ong. It's my great pleasure to be a part of this seminar. And it's been kind of 2 years since I see you in person due to COVID-19. And I also thanks the Sejong Institute and Korea Foundation for organizing this seminar. First, let me share my slide. Okay. Right. If I'm not wrong, the Ambassador Wong and other participants in this first session got the a summary of my presentation, but I missed the very important part. Actually, the overall topic of this session is about Indo-Pacific, Korea's and ASEAN's perception on Indo-Pacific and the convergence, difference, strategy, and all that. But I mistakenly thought that this first session is about the New Zealand policy. So most of my presentation was focused on the New Zealand policy, but in the last minute, I added some elements on the Indo-Pacific. Okay, we'll just briefly mention the prepared my argument on the New Zealand policy in a very passing manner. And I got the 5 keywords here. The first, expectation. Of course, the New Zealand policy was a presidential agenda, and it carried a very heavy political weight. So when the President Moon Jae-in first announced the New Zealand policy, my expectation was that if the New Zealand policy would be successful, if the next presidential election, the candidates come up with policy initiative toward ASEAN again, then I would say that the New Zealand policy was quite successful. And we don't know yet if the presidential candidate next year would come up with any idea on Korea's policy toward Southeast Asia, but I get my finger crossed. And one of the goal of New Zealand policy was putting ASEAN as one of the 5 main focus of Korean foreign policy, and I believe this was achieved because other than Korean Peninsula, we have 4 major powers surrounding South Korea, but at the moment, ASEAN is as much discussed as the 4 major powers surrounding Korean Peninsula. The second achievement, the first one was consistency. I still remember Ambassador Wong Keng-yong in 2018 questioned that if this time South Korean government would be consistent towards Southeast Asia, and I believe the consistency was largely achieved. You know, in the past few years, there was up and down kind of a roller coaster in the Korean Peninsula. Nevertheless, the New Zealand policy was kept and pursued consistently. And the New Zealand policy made a great achievement in raising domestic awareness. This is my personal experience. I don't have any question on this achievement. Then the third achievement I regard important is the institutional strengthening that we have today a whole bureau in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs dedicated to ASEAN affairs. And of course, we have the Presidential Committee on New Zealand Policy, and our representative to the ASEAN was strengthened. And these institutions will last, and they will contribute a lot on Korea-ASEAN relations. But during the process of pursuing New Zealand policy, there were unexpected development. First, COVID-19. And after 2019 commemorative summit between Korea and Southeast Asia, South Korean government was preparing New Zealand policy 2.0 or second stage, but suddenly whole global community was hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. So there was a little bit of a problem in pursuing New Zealand policy. And the second one is quite relevant to today's discussion, the New Zealand policy and many Indo-Pacifics. I say many Indo-Pacifics. It's not just about the US Indo-Pacific strategy, but there's also Japanese Indo-Pacific, Australian Indo-Pacific, Indian Indo-Pacific, of course, the ASEAN Indo-Pacific. And South Korea had to find a way how to coordinate rather than shying away from these Indo-Pacific initiatives. And of course, the Myanmar in 2021, this year in February, the military coup was a great challenge for New Southern policy. And unlike previous government, this Moon Jae-in government was quite, they were quite honest that the military coup in Myanmar was not a democratic development in the country. It is against the general will of the Myanmar people. Before, South Korean government was have a lot of kept quiet on these kind of development like a military coup or human rights issues, but this government was straightforward, saying that the military coup in Myanmar was against the people's will in Myanmar. And I hope this would be South Korea foreign policy tradition in the coming years. And of course, there is some limit, the missing element in New Southern policy. First, we didn't have big pockets in pursuing New Southern policy. So there are dots of small projects, but we don't have a clear-cut flagship project, big project. And often the naming of South Korea's cooperation with ASEAN countries were inconsistent. What I mean is that sometimes the Korea's cooperation with particular Southeast Asian countries were framed under Korea and, for example, Malaysia, bilateral cooperation, but some other times it was named New Southern policy. So rather than switching between this bilateral and New Southern policy, it is better for South Korean government to put all the cooperation project under one banner, New Southern policy. And the second word is diversification within ASEAN. As you know, the more than 40 or even almost 50% of our economic cooperation is with Vietnam. The New Southern policy tried to diversify our cooperation to other Southeast Asian countries. So we launched Korea-Mekong cooperation, and we recently launched Korea Maritime Southeast Asia cooperation. But I'm not quite sure if the latter one, the Korea Maritime Southeast Asia cooperation, made any big progress yet. And of course, this is my favorite topic, tilted tripod. There are three pillars: political security, economic, and social-cultural cooperation under New Southern policy. The second two, economic cooperation and social-cultural cooperation, made a big progress, I guess, but political and security cooperation is still there. It didn't make much progress so far. And the way forward for the New Southern policy, South Korea definitely have to have wider regional perspective and vision. As you know, today, most of the regional countries and the big powers surrounding Indo-Pacific region is talking about Indo-Pacific, wider regional perspective, strategies and visions. But South Korea is still confined bilateral cooperation between Korea and Southeast Asia, or Korea and India. So it is quite urgent issue for South Korea to develop further a bigger and wider regional perspective, including all Indo-Pacific region. And second, multilateralism. The New Southern policy was quite strong in bilateral cooperation, but it didn't pay that much attention to regional multilateral cooperation like ASEAN Plus 3, East Asia Summit, ADMM Plus, and all that. Of course, South Korea participated in those meetings and institutions, but I'm not quite sure if it was really incorporated into New Southern policy. The regional multilateralism is quite crucial to manage our relation with the superpowers and also deal with many non-traditional and human security issues, and it is the weapon of regional small and medium powers. The last one, of course, we are expecting a new president in March next year. There will be an election, presidential election, and I really hope the new government, either from the ruling party or opposition party, they continue our approach and strategy toward Southeast Asia. And the last point, this is something new I just added in the last minute. And I have to repeat a little bit the problem of South Korea's narrow regional perspective. And I strongly recommend for the next South Korean government to introduce something like Korean outlook on Indo-Pacific as a regional middle power or global middle power, or some people say South Korea is now advanced. Then we have to have a wider regional strategy, vision, and perspective. We cannot just confine ourselves in narrow bilateral cooperation. And of course, in our Indo-Pacific strategy, one of the central elements should be South Korea's contribution for regional multilateral cooperation on top of Korea's cooperation with Southeast Asian countries. The second point is South Korea has to embrace Indo-Pacific, not as a strategy, but as a concept of region. Some countries, like the United States, the Indo-Pacific is US strategy toward Asia, rather than just jumping on or bandwagoning other countries in the Pacific strategy. South Korea has to develop our own strategy, putting Indo-Pacific as a concept of a region. Then here, it is very important for South Korean society in general has to overcome some kind of a misunderstanding on the concept of Indo-Pacific. It was, I believe, in 2017 when President Trump visited South Korea and aired the concept of Indo-Pacific in South Korea, and the South Korean government was kind of confused at that time. What is Indo-Pacific? We don't know Indo-Pacific. It is US strategy to South Korea or Asia. And then South Korean people and government as well had kind of this misperception that Indo-Pacific is just US strategy. But if you look at the other part of the region, there are, as I mentioned, there are many different Indo-Pacifics. The Indo-Pacific is not just strategy, but some countries adopt Indo-Pacific as a concept of a region. The South Korea has to overcome this kind of misperception. And the last point is alternative Indo-Pacific. I'm not saying that we have to replace Indo-Pacific region with some other concept, but we have to go beyond the US-China strategic competition. The regional small and medium powers should be more proactive in building our own strategy, vision, and regional order for the Indo-Pacific region. To do that, there's a good point for South Korea and ASEAN countries put their hands together. And for that, South Korea has to correct this problem of a tilted tripod. The South Korea has to be more proactive in setting up and institutionalizing strategic and security dialogue and cooperation with Southeast Asian countries. This is all I have today, and I guess I spent more than 10 minutes, almost 15 minutes, and I believe still Gavi hasn't arrived to the meeting room, but unfortunately I have to stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. I think this is a very concise overview I appreciate your effort. May I now move on to the next speaker? And the next speaker is Gita. Are you ready to come on? Or is
Yes,
Kavi already
yes.
on the screen?
I think
Okay, Gita,
Kavi is not
I
around.
think you better come on now, Gita.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, I can hear you. Ladies and gentlemen,
Okay.
we have our next presenter, Gita Govindasamy. She is a senior lecturer at the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Malaya, that is in Malaysia. So, Gita, over to you. 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong. Dr. Lee, thank you very much for a very valuable and insight look on ROK ASEAN relations. It really amazes me that all these years, you have been very passionate about this topic, and I think you are the expert in Korea on this topic. And it's also great that okay, I think my video is not working.
Oh, no, you're on, yes.
Yeah, okay.
We can see you.
Because I'm getting, okay, that's good. Okay. So Dr. Lee, as a discussant, I think it is interesting that you say that South Korea has to go beyond looking in the context of US-China rivalry in terms of Indo-Pacific, and it has to have its own regional Indo-Pacific outlook. But the problem lies in the fact that South Korea is heavily dependent on China economically, and at the same time, in terms of security, South Korea is dependent on US. So it is sandwiched between the US and China. So I think it is going to be quite tough for South Korea to actually come up with its own regional Indo-Pacific outlook. But what I really liked about your presentation was the fact that you actually pointed out that now South Korea is more openly discussing and debating about Myanmar and COVID-19 issues in ASEAN and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I would like if you could highlight what is South Korea's position in terms of the South China Sea, because the South China Sea dispute is it's a huge thing for ASEAN member states. And as part of the ASEAN-ROK bilateral cooperation, what role can South Korea actually have in trying to resolve the dispute between claimant states in ASEAN with China? I think that is one question that I would really like you to answer. At the same time, I feel that you have pointed out that in Korea itself, more people are aware of ASEAN. I think it holds true for ASEAN also, because now I teach in a program, in a Korean program at my university, and I see that among the youth, there is so much of attention given to Korea, and more so, of course, in terms of social aspect, Hallyu, Korean Wave, and so on. And the interest in Korea has increased among Southeast Asians because of Hallyu and so on and so forth. At the same time, if I may take, because I'm Malaysian, if I may take Malaysia as an example, in terms of halal products, we see that Korea has now gone into trying to obtain halal certification for its products, because there is a huge market, a Muslim market out there, which is interested in Korea, in all things Korean, yeah. But because of the halal impediment, it is one of those things that has become an obstacle. And I see, I've been going to South Korea quite often, and I see, I think for the last 5 or 6 years, because of this new southern policy. And in Malaysia, there have been quite a number of memorandum of understandings in trying to help South Korea in obtaining halal certification, so on and so forth. Apart from that, I think this session was supposed to be talking about Indo-Pacific, right? How does ASEAN view Indo-Pacific, and how does ROK view Indo-Pacific? So if I can, I would like to just give a few pointers on how ASEAN actually looks at Indo-Pacific. Yeah. In contemporary times, we see that South Asia has become the main theater of an emerging great power rivalry. And what is very interesting here is that ASEAN was founded on the idea that foreign interference have to be limited. But we are back to that era where we are seeing US-China rivalry playing in our own backyard in Southeast Asia. So therefore, it is not surprising that Southeast Asia has become like a central part of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which aims to defend freedom and openness through rule-based order. Yeah, but this is where the problem lies, because the Association of Southeast Asian Nations has always been the main driver in setting regional norms, as can be seen in ASEAN-led mechanisms like APT, ASEAN Regional Forum, and East Asian Summit. Yeah, but with the emergence of the Indo-Pacific concept, we are seeing that American influence is increasing and ASEAN centrality is decreasing, or that is the perception. With the introduction of the Indo-Pacific strategy, I feel that ASEAN fears losing its centrality, right? And more so with the emergence of the Quad, and recently AUKUS has seen the absence of ASEAN or any consultations with ASEAN. So with American influence increasing in Asia Pacific in the long run, the Indo-Pacific has a potential to undermine ASEAN's convening power in the existing regional architecture. So this is one of the fears of ASEAN. And at the same time, ASEAN is also facing disunity within itself, because some of ASEAN member states like Vietnam and Philippines, concerned with the rise of China, are more favorable towards the Indo-Pacific strategy, while others like Malaysia, have a wait and see attitude. We have to remember that China influences ASEAN greatly with its Belt and Road Initiative. So investing in billions of dollars worth of much needed infrastructure projects, especially in the CLMV countries, we see that ASEAN member states like South Korea are refusing to align either with US or China. They are keeping equidistance between these two major powers. So that is one of the things about Indo-Pacific, because we see that while, as Dr. Lee pointed out, that South Korea has to go beyond Indo-Pacific, beyond US-China rivalry. But the fact is, in the context of ASEAN-ROK relations, where China is within ASEAN, the influence of China within ASEAN is a huge factor. Yeah. So because there are differences of perception about China and the US in ASEAN, I think this has exposed ASEAN disunity, and it is questionable if ASEAN's centrality can be maintained in the long run. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we are seeing the beginning of the end of the ASEAN centrality concept. And if that is the case, then what happens to ASEAN mechanisms, multilateral mechanisms like ASEAN +3 and so on? Who then, which country then becomes the main actor, main influencer? Yeah. So I think similarly with Seoul, I feel that South Korea is also keeping equidistance between the Indo-Pacific strategy and Belt and Road Initiative. And it has been very reticent in adopting either these these two mechanisms very actively. Yeah. So like many Southeast Asian countries, Seoul also finds itself sandwiched between the US and China. And I feel that for South Korea, economic regionalism, I think Dr. Lee, you have referred to this in your writings, earlier writings. Economic regionalism is more important than security alliances. With that, I will stop here. I think Dr. Kavi has come onto the scene. Thank you, Ambassador Ong.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you very much for that very concise highlighting of the three important nagging issues: South China Sea, China-US competition and rivalry, and the future of our ASEAN centrality. Yeah, I think those are very pertinent points. I think, Kavi, I hope you have heard what Gita has said. And earlier on, Dr. Lee Jae-yong has highlighted the ASEAN-ROK partnership. Yeah, there has been a certain expectation, yet the achievements are still not yet to the satisfaction of everybody, particularly both sides, ROK and ASEAN, because there are several missing dimensions. Overall, the Indo-Pacific as a concept, as a strategy, seem to be preoccupying most of our minds at this moment. Yeah, and the China-US rivalry, intensifying competitions have basically made things more complicated to the countries of the region, to our population, to the observer. And Gita has pointed out a very important point. What will be the convening power of ASEAN going to be like if our ASEAN centrality is seen to be declining? So, Kavi, over to you. Maybe you can, in a very brief manner, 8 to 10 minutes,
yes,
you can give us a readout from your angle. Over to you,
well,
Kavi.
thank you. Well, thank you very much, Professor Ong Keng Yong. It's a very difficult time because today Thailand, the second day Thailand opened the country, and I got stuck in the traffic, and the traffic has, and also as you can see, I have to wear a mask. I am in a fast food store, fast foods, as you can see, fast food. So I have to apologize for the inconveniences. I have prepared 2 short PowerPoint just to answer. Can you give me the second one? I would like to answer all the questions raised by Dr. Gita and Dr. Lee, but I would like to start out a little bit more basic because South Korea relation with Southeast Asia has gone back a long time, especially in the contemporary history. I like to focus that a little bit, and I think I like the way President Moon Jae-in spoke at the ASEAN Summit. Well, unfortunately, Professor Ong Keng Yong, you were not second anymore, so we do not have the privilege to access President Moon Jae-in's speech, but I was lucky. Somebody told me Moon Jae-in used the word that he was happy to reunited with ASEAN leaders. That is give a very strong sense that Korea now belongs to ASEAN family. And as you can see, Korean and Southeast Asia, as Dr. Lee pointed out, have already been very close. Can you turn to my third one? I just want to show you a little bit. The third one, the
slide.
PowerPoint, this one, the slide. Yeah, as you can see, bilateral between ASEAN and Korea surged on 2019 during the 30th commemorative summit in Busan, and also the first meeting of the Mekong summit. It's very important because the excellent leadership and personal rapport between President Moon Jae-in and all ASEAN leaders, especially among the Mekong region. I think this is one of the points I like to stress, because the way Moon Jae-in approaches Southeast Asia, approaches a family, and I think Southeast Asia has responded well. And as you know, in 2019, Moon Jae-in spent almost quite a few days with ASEAN leaders to discuss bilateral issues and also some of the Mekong-related challenges. And what is important is also that both sides are now working together on many issues. For example, I'd like to turn you to my previous slide, please. Okay, at the moment, both without discussion, but just be part of the dialogue partner, I think both ASEAN and Korea has played the role of middle power. They try to promote conflict preventions. Preventive diplomacy is very clear, as Dr. Lee pointed out. In the case of Myanmar, South Korea under Moon Jae-in was very strong. Actually, it was among the first Asian countries to stop the discussion with the defense officials. And of course, because of the threats from the North Koreans' nuclearization, Korea has been long ago trying to reduce tension and strengthen peaceful environment. On the common stand on the US-China rivalry, it's very clear that ROK and ASEAN will not choose sides. And it's very interesting also, speaking from the part of Thailand, because Thailand and South Korea share many similar features. First of all, we both are the ally of United States, and we have close economic relations. So we have decided that the best policy is to stand in the middle, don't take sides. As the issue that has been discussed at the summit, I was very pleased with the outcome, because Korea has been very active in providing vaccine to ASEAN, as well as the medical materials to both Thailand and CLMV. And I think this one has made Korea role and futures cooperation on par with China and Japan. This is my own analysis, that I believe Korea under Moon Jae-in has tried so hard to promote through the New Southern policy that it has enabled Korea to compete with China and also with Japan. And regarding one of the most important issues, because of the power rivalries, I would like to see more of cooperation on strategic matters between ASEAN and Korea in all dimensions, in order to prevent any hegemonic ambition by great power in East Asia. One of the ways is to synergize between the New Southern policy plus an Asia outlook on the Indo-Pacific. For me, there's a lot of common points that both sides can work on. I don't mind South Korea, as Dr. Lee pointed out, there are many versions, at least 8 versions of the Indo-Pacific, you know. But it's important is the content and the framework and the area of cooperation. And I think between ROK and ASEAN, this kind of synergy could take place. And I also hope that in the future, Korea, ROK and ASEAN could come together and issue a joint statement on cooperation synergies between the New Southern Policy and AOIP. Can you move to the next slide, please? I want to focus on the last part. One of the most interesting about Korea and ASEAN is that there is no complaint or anti-Korea in Southeast Asia. That's allowed, this, I think, characteristic allow South Korea to promote ROK ASEAN relations so fast. Because in the past, as Dr. Lee pointed out, that Korean government lacked consistency in its relation with ASEAN, and also has paid too much attention on the West, and of course on the Korean Peninsula. Now, I think because with the strong cultural influence in Southeast Asia, the Korean now can make an inroad into Southeast Asia and turn soft power into hard power. But at the moment, we have not yet seen that. And it's also very interesting to know that Korean soft power permeated among ASEAN youth without any resistance from local communities. That is the most amazing, because if you look at between China, between Japan, there are two economic power. They all face resistance. The only complaint I have heard so far is from my friend whose young daughter want to imitate one of the famous singer at Thai. Her name is Lalisa. She was trained by Korean, speak Korean, and the member of Blackpink. She is like a superstar in the international pop scene. For me, that is the synergy of Korean culture and Southeast Asia. A Thai born in the countryside, in the provinces, trained at a young age and become superstar. So this kind of, just one example, how Korea and Southeast Asia can use the kind of people-centered, people cultural heritage to cement each other and turn into something more meaningful than just the pop power or K-pop or K-food or K-cosmetic. I think this is the new wave for me. My last sentence of my last slide is that I think there is a strong two-way between people-to-people exchange, leading to form a hybrid soft power between Korea and Southeast Asia, as never before seen. This kind of thing has never before seen. I only saw briefly between Thailand, Southeast Asia, Philippines, and Taiwan. We have seen some of the Japan group with Jakarta, but the kind of you see now between Thailand and Korea, which I think will be the new wave of Korean and ASEAN cooperation. And finally, I again have to apologize for this kind of difficulty that I brought to this seminar, because you probably heard a funny noise around me. I hope that I have made some point clear. Thank you very much, Professor Ong Keng Yong. Sorry.
Thank you, Kavi. You are the wonderful, innovative, and energetic man that I have known over the last 30 years. Yeah, in your tight squeeze over there, you managed to find a fast food restaurant in Bangkok, and the marvelous of technology allow us to communicate with you. You can even present your slides. And your last point really is that there is so much potential for the soft power of both
Yes.
Republic of Korea and ASEAN countries. So wonderful. And I appreciate your great effort to be with us this afternoon in this session. Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have heard the three big speakers, Dr. Lee Jae-yong, Dr. Gita Govindasamy, and our good expert from Thailand, Bangkok, Kavi Chongkitawong. So now we will spend the next 20 minutes or so listening to two commentators. Yeah, the one to start off is Professor Kim Yong-jong. Yeah, he is from the Yonsei University. Maybe Professor Kim, you go first, and then later we will have our friend from the Philippines, Victor Tindo Manik. So over to you, Professor Kim.
All right, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, the Kavis and Dr. Lees and then Dr. Gita for your insightful opinions. It's been always my pleasure to learn from you. So actually, what I'm going to share with you today is basically in line with the point raised by the previous speakers. But what I want to focus is that those areas are relatively untapped so far, but actually ASEAN and Korea can further explore. And also it is directly and indirectly related with that response to the Indo-Pacific, right? So in my opinion, prior to the New Southern policy, the relation between ASEAN and Korea have been affected, if not constrained, mainly by the three factors. First is the South Korea security concern of the North Korea, although there has been a number of inter-Korean dialogues and agreements, but there has been a consistent tension between the two Koreas. When South Korea faces higher level of the threat from the North Korea, South Korea has tended toward inward-looking diplomacy policy with a limited relation with major power rather than ASEAN. Second is the economic interest. The pursuit of the economic interest in the form of the economic cooperation could result in negative effect, given the current situation and trend on bilateral relations in the long term, if there is a lack of the sense of the mutual benefit and understanding. And lastly, East Asian regionalism. And the South Korea has relatively less engaged with ASEAN and its norm in comparison to China and Japan. It instead joined the rivalry race with this country to approach the ASEAN, while there was yet enough space to develop the bilateralism further. So, but with the implementation of the New Southern policy, actually New Southern policy should be seen as a new initiative going beyond the narrowly defined national interest. Actually, it proposed a possible community between the ASEAN and Korea. Actually, it's quite ambitious, but it is quite deserved to be attended, right? And this concept is based on the three pillars. And as you know, they're so-called the three Ps. The first P refers to people-to-people community, but ASEAN, it's not only the South Korea has owned the creation, but ASEAN has long been put its priority on its people, as it coined people-oriented and people-centered community. However, there's increasing the concern of the practice of the democracy in many countries in this region. And the response of the Moon Jae-in's government to the Myanmar issues this year, it was unprecedented, and also it should be seen as a meaningful movement as it provides a normative ground for government and cooperation among them. And the principle of the people-to-people is expected to further enlarge the scope of definition of the national interest and security, in particular, given the complexity of the challenges which posed by the COVID-19 currently. It is a time to put priority and enlarge the concept of the security by embracing the concept of the human security. And second P is the peace. Actually, it refers to the enhanced cooperation for peace in this region. But I think the peace areas in the political and security cooperation is the most untapped areas, remain untapped areas. In a power dominant game, actually, in this region, ASEAN as a middle power has not been perceived a relevant player through the though ASEAN has continuously paid attention on the inter-Korean relation, including North Korea's nuclear programs and the power rivalries. South Korea has strived to have close ties with the four major powers, namely the US, China, Japan, and Russia, in dealing with North Korea issues. Thus, the gaining ASEAN support for South Korea has been perceived as a supplementary diplomatic tool rather than immediate interest. But for ASEAN, building a peace in East Asia is part of its goal of the ASEAN community. Actually, it's quite closely interrelated. It can be pursued through the norm diffusion process. As Kabi has put in his note, I found that ASEAN, the possible enlargement or the applications toward Northeast Asia because the Southeast Asia ASEAN has the ASEAN Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Treaty, and which was implemented in 1995. And actually, the tension and possible conflict among the ASEAN member states has been often managed through the informal engagement. With ASEAN, having dialogue is often seen as a goal rather than a strategic means. Such norm and practice in international relations of Southeast Asia evolved through the ASEAN, actually, that could bring about positive effect on Northeast Asia as well, I hope, particularly in the Korean relations. To further materialize this shared concern and the more ambitious attempt should be made. So it has been witnessed that the bilateral and multilateral communication channel have its own limitation. Inter-Korean bilateral dialogue have been often disturbed by the unforeseen incident or the change in government in South Korea or related parties. And multilateral dialogue process through the six-party talk was also vulnerable to power game among the major powers and the breach of the agreements. ASEAN's valuable experience of the norm-based peace building could be useful to enhance mutual trust between the parties in Northeast Asia. Actually, in the area of the resurgence of the nationalism and rivalry between the US and China, and the ASEAN's experience of the trust building and peace management should be seen not only as a strategic means, but also the profound values for East Asian regional securities. ASEAN has long tried to keep its centrality and neutrality as it emphasized the peaceful resolution of the related issues. Meanwhile, the resolution of the North Korea's nuclear programs would bring a new impetus for full implementation of the Southeast Asian nuclear weapon free zone. In this sense, ASEAN should be able to embrace Northeast Asia for its long-delayed full realization of the nuclear weapon free zone, right? Many of the ASEAN member states have developed bilateral relations with North Korea for many decades. And some member states have established their diplomatic relation with North Korea even earlier than South Korea. In fact, the ASEAN-led ARF is the only working regional organization which have two Koreas as a member. ASEAN's neutrality, which has been shown through the ARF process, seem to quite attractive to the North Koreans. So ASEAN's norm and practice would provide a new platform for inter-Korea dialogues, as ASEAN may consider possible offer for kind of dialogue channels for two Koreas. I would like to suggest that here I want to call it this is a ASEAN +2 mechanisms. Yeah. So it should be also noted that the ASEAN-Korea dialogue partnership was not only the natural born. All attempts made by South Korea in the early 1980s, prior to its membership, the dialogue partnership, to establish the dialogue partnership, but it failed because the ASEAN's concern over its political impact, which would undermine the ASEAN centrality. But time and environment has changed. Now we are facing the new challenges and the circumstances of the Indo-Pacific. So actually, there is no doubt that US is the most important player with particular regard to inter-Korean issues. However, the great power politics are too vulnerable as their strategic concern on the issues that differ from one another. Given the historical and geopolitical background of the inter-Korean relation, in a similar vein, ASEAN norm can further imply for East Asian peace toward East Asian communities. So the norm can be shared in dealing with the South China Sea issues in a similar sense where South Korea can play a certain role of the supporting peaceful resolution of the conflict. It would transform the region from the great power politics to norm-based politics for peace. Actually, the other point which raised by the other previous speaker, very much I agree, especially the great potential of the soft power through the spread of the Hallus and so on. But I want to say that this should be a cultural interaction and cultural cooperation. The cultural interaction, it shouldn't be one way. And so it should be the two-way interactions. So rather than economic benefit, and so not only see as the entertainment industry, but it should be seen as a great potential areas for the mutual understanding. I may stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. Next, we have our friend from Manila, Professor Dindo Manik. Yeah, he used to be teaching at the De La Salle University in Manila. Then he joined the government, and then he was active working for different senators. And finally, now he is in the private sector. So this is one man having all the three sectorial experiences, people sector, private sector, and the policy official sector. So Dindo, you have a few minutes to give us your takeaway from what you have heard and maybe one or two good suggestions. Over to you, sir. 10 minutes, yeah?
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador. Yep. Thank you. Thank you also to the Korean Foundation, to the Sejong Institute for this invitation. Allow me to share some of my thoughts with regards to how do we advance multilateral and inclusive cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, taking into consideration the new Southern policy. You know, the emergence of new and evolving security challenges in the Indo-Pacific has changed the way states interact and cooperate with each other. We've seen recent security developments from the AUKUS alliance between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, even the first ever in-person Quad meeting. But in the region, we have issues of common interest and concern, such as the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, the renewed tensions in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea, current situation in Myanmar, and the strategic competition between the United States and China. They all present opportunities for states within the region to work together towards advancing multilateral and inclusive cooperation. Deepening state relations and realigning foreign and security policies have also become a significant step to minimize security risks and promote stability in the region. In the context of non-traditional security threats, such as the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we saw how South Korea have made contributions to the region's pandemic response. Amidst the global health crisis, South Korea and members of ASEAN have also continued to work on other strategic interests, such as cybersecurity, digital economy, development of enterprises, especially small and medium-scale enterprises, technology and innovation, tourism, education, climate change, and public health. Aside from this, economic cooperation continues to be an important pillar of ASEAN and South Korea relations. Given the multifaceted cooperation between the two, the ASEAN and South Korea have the common interest to sustain the region's security and development. For the ASEAN, this comes in the form of ASEAN Outlook in the Indo-Pacific, which highlights the organization's centrality in addressing the region's security issues. For South Korea, this is reflected in its current government's foreign policy initiatives, which we hope will continue in the next administration. South Korea President Moon Jae-in has consistently expressed his policy of building stronger and robust ties with ASEAN. Under his leadership, the country continues to pursue the the new Southern Policy, which aims to strengthen the relations, South Korea's relations with India and ASEAN. The ASEAN outlook for the Indo-Pacific and the new Southern Policy both reflect commitment to multilateralism in the region and the respect for the rule-based international order. Without formally embracing the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific, as many have done, the new Southern Policy echoes the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and its calls for regional cooperation and governance initiative, which also includes energy, infrastructure, and development. The NSP, or the New Southern Policy, remains a distinct strategy, but not entirely different from the Indo-Pacific strategies of states within the region. The purpose of the New Southern Policy is not to offer an alternative approach to cooperation, but to actually create additional channels for cooperation that will complement existing strategies in the region. For the ASEAN, working with South Korea gives it a larger role in managing the security environment in the Indo-Pacific. While economic and sociocultural ties have flourished, South Korea and ASEAN still hesitate to engage in terms of responding to traditional security challenges. In particular, the rise of China and its expansionist agenda have continued to challenge the capacity of the ASEAN and South Korea to contribute in maintaining regional peace and stability. I wear my hat as a Filipino, not only as a scholar, but as a policy advocate. I've always believed that in the context of evolving security architecture in the region, my country, the Philippines, must continue to assess its foreign and security policy, to uphold its national security and protect its national interests. From a security perspective, this translates to continuously modernizing its military forces, strengthening its present alliances, and adjusting its foreign policy direction. Next year, in May 2022, the Philippines will hold a national election. And I see it as an opportunity for the country, for my country, to build upon its alliances and existing security partnership with like-minded states in the region, those that share democratic values. The change in leadership that we expect will also allow the country to engage more effectively with ASEAN and countries such as South Korea, especially in terms of responding to various security challenges. Promoting a rule-based international order lies in fostering and collaborating with alliances, not only like AUKUS and Quad, but maybe with the support of the New Southern Policy and ASEAN. A vast network of alliances, as well as effective implementation and integration of regional policies, can also be effectively managed. Dynamic power shifts in the emergence of various traditional and non-traditional security threats in the region. As new and complex security concerns continue to evolve, so does the need for policies and strategies to converge and for states to cooperate with one another to advance a more peaceful, prosperous, and stable Indo-Pacific. Again, thank you for this opportunity to share as a discussant and some points in this conference.
Thank you very much, Dindo. That's a very nice and direct way of summing up what we have heard so far. Ladies and gentlemen, speakers and discussants, I think we are coming to the close of our time. Yeah. I thought that what you have heard so far from the speakers and the discussant is really that there is vast potential for ASEAN and ROK to continue to work together. I always feel very flattered as an ASEAN citizen to hear others outside of ASEAN describing ASEAN as a middle power. Yeah, indeed, if we combine all the 10 together, the 10 Southeast Asian countries, form a formidable economy, and together we have 650 million people. We are likely to become the fourth largest economy in the world, so on and so forth. So there is vast potential, and if we can work together with another middle power like the Republic of Korea, I think definitely there can be more peace and prosperity for our people. Of course, there are many challenges and problems. Yeah, in this session, you have heard some of these challenges and problems. But as the title of our session put it very positively, there are convergences and there are complementarities. Things may not be exactly the way we want it. And this is perhaps part of the democratization process, because every 5 years we have election. Yeah. And in the case of Republic of Korea, you have a change of president every fixed period of time. Yeah. But I think we can build on what we already have and have already developed. So I think there is great optimism for all our countries in ASEAN as well as in the Republic of Korea. Hopefully, the Korean Peninsula can bring about a more peaceful and forward-looking dynamic, and then we in East Asia, together with Southeast Asia, can make much more advances. The key lie in really the bigger countries, the big powers. I think that is the topic of the next session. Yeah, I think we will listen to the speakers and discussions in the next segment of our seminar today to get better idea of what ASEAN will face going forward. But I suppose, unless you all have any particular strong point to make after you hear the rest of the panel members here, I think we are coming to the end of our time. Yeah. Maybe I should just take the liberty of giving ourselves 1 more minute. Anything that the panelists have heard that you want to take the opportunity to put across to our participant and our audience? I think we have 1 minute. So keywords. Yeah. Dr. Lee Jae-yong, you started the ball rolling. Any new 5 words? You will give us 6 words. Maybe 1 more word. Anything?
I guess I have more than that. So we have the third session on the, for discussion. So we can discuss further in the session. Thank you.
Okay, good. Gita, any particular point you want to put forward? Thank you for your point about South China Sea, yeah, halal certification, and your Indo-Pacific concept and the concern. Any 1 or 2 words you have?
No, I think we can discuss at the end, the last session, as Dr. Lee pointed out. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kavi, you missed a lot of our action. Anything you want to add? We can't hear you, Kavi. We can't hear you.
Yeah, just 1 word. I think ROK and ASEAN has a lot of potential. They have to turn the soft power aplenty into strategic dynamism. That I think would promote peace and stability. Thank you.
Okay, good. Your strategic dynamism. I am getting hungry. I'm seeing all the fast food in the background of your screen. All right. Okay, Dindo, any particular last word? You have heard all the other guys. You can also wait for the last section, but 1 quick sentence from you, from the private sector in particular.
Of course, I simply would like to emphasize that there is a lot of potential for advancing multilateral and inclusive cooperation between ASEAN and the Republic of Korea within the region of the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. Professor Kim, you are from Yonsei University. 1 last word from you, sir. Can't hear you.
actually, I agree with Dr. Jayans and Dr. Gita's suggestion. Then I think it can be further discussed in the following sessions.
Okay, that's good then. I think I will now close this session, which is quite a good, short and sharp way of putting on our table and to our audience the various characteristics of ASEAN-ROK partnership. And we have worked very hard, and I want to express the view some of you have put forward earlier that the Moon Jae-in administration in the Republic of Korea has actually poured a lot of effort and resources into keeping the ASEAN-ROK partnership on the go, keeping it prospective and looking forward. Thank you very much. I hand over now to the organizer. Back to you, madam.
Thank you all for the insightful and very thorough presentation and discussion. I'd like to give my special thanks to Ambassador Ong Keng-yong for your excellent guidance and also for sharing us your valuable perspectives on this issue. We will now have a short coffee break, I think approximately 10 minutes, and we'll convene around 3-5 p.m., okay? And stay tuned because as many of you already said, we will continue our discussion in session 3. So stay tuned. Thank you. May I have your attention, please? Session 2 will begin in about a minute. Hey, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope all of you are enjoying the proceedings so far. Throughout the very wonderful presentations and discussions in session 1, we've learned that we have vast room for further cooperation. And also, we have to deepen our partnership to set multilateral order in the region, keeping ASEAN centrality. So to do that, we have to know what are the perceptions of the key partner countries in the Indo-Pacific region, and how ASEAN and Korea can work with key partner countries in this environment. So in this session, I would like to invite Honorable Ambassador Jo Byung-jae. He, as a career diplomat, was ambassador to Myanmar and Malaysia. He also served as Chancellor of Korea National Diplomatic Academy. So Ambassador Jo will also guide us through the open discussion on session 3. Ambassador Jo, please.
Okay, thank you. So we can go ahead. Thank you, President Lee Gun of Korea Foundation. And thank you, President Lee Sang-hyun of Sejong Institute for having me on board on this quite meaningful seminar titled ASEAN-Korea Partnership in the Indo-Pacific, Consolidation and the Expansion. And I appreciate Ambassador Wong for moderating the first session of this seminar. Now we move to session 2, and actually 2 and 3. The subject for session 2 is, as you know, how ASEAN and the ROK can work with key partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. And session 3 is potentials and the challenges for future ASEAN-ROK cooperation with the partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, I think session 2 and session 3 are of the quite the same subject. So I will not have any bridging between the two. So after the presentation of the speakers and discussants of session 2, then we will move directly to session 3. I'll invite all of the participants for discussions. So, okay, let's, I think then we start. First, we will have the presentation of Satu Limaye, who is a Vice President of East-West Center and also Director of East-West Center in Washington. Can we start?
Good day, everyone. My name is Satu Limaye. I'm Vice President of the East-West Center and the Director of the East-West Center in Washington. I'm delighted to be here today for this program on the ASEAN-ROK Partnership Seminar, focusing on the ASEAN-ROK Partnership in the Indo-Pacific Era, Consolidation and Expansion. I wish I could join in real time, of course, but given the timing of the program and the circumstances that we're all dealing with, I have chosen to provide a video recording of some remarks, which I hope will be useful to your deliberations. I will, of course, very much miss being with all of you and having a back and forth discussion that would be, I'm sure, illuminating and very worthwhile. First and foremost, let me congratulate and thank Sejong Institute and the Korea Foundation for their seminar initiative and the invitation to join this program. I'm delighted to say that we have been working closely with the Korea Foundation here in Washington, D.C. on a program that is similar in theme to the subject of our discussions today, and that is US-ROK ASEAN cooperation. We currently are operating a visiting fellows program with folks from the US, from Korea, and from Southeast Asian countries. And their current projects range from intellectual property protection to diplomacy and security to smart cities and energy. So I want to say, first off, thank you very much to the Korea Foundation for its support of this innovative US-Korea ASEAN Visiting Fellowship Program. and stand by for the results of our wonderful first inaugural class of fellows. Second, I would like to acknowledge the Sejong Institute, with which I have engaged over the years and have the utmost respect for, given it being a key source of top-notch analysis and engagement in the East Asia region. I always benefit from engaging with Sejong colleagues. And finally, let me say what a wonderful group of folks has been assembled for this seminar. And I look forward to the full recording so that I may learn from you and benefit from your wisdom and your scholarly work. As we move to the International Summit season in Asia during the next month, and considering major recent developments such as the Quad and AUKUS, and of course the ongoing ROK alliance, it is a very opportune moment to reflect on the ASEAN-ROK partnership, including the US-ROK alliance itself. With elections coming up in Korea early next year, it will be important to have continuity in US-ROK cooperation with ASEAN. I was asked to speak for a few minutes on US strategies and interests in this second session on how ROK and ASEAN can work with key partner countries in the Indo-Pacific. In this context, I would say that next to US direct engagement with ASEAN, highlighted, for example, by President Biden's engagement with ASEAN leaders last week, and the issuance of a new fact sheet on new initiatives to expand the US-ASEAN strategic partnership, working with allies and partners is at the top list of US strategies and interests, not only in the world, but in the Indo-Pacific region, and certainly within Southeast Asia and ASEAN. It is therefore a terrific policy progress to have now formalized a US-ROK commitment to work together in Southeast Asia and beyond, such as the Pacific Islands region. The fact that we now have a Republic of Korea US fact sheet called Working Together to Promote Cooperation Between the New Southern Policy and the Indo-Pacific Strategy shows the efforts of our two governments to align our respective engagement in this vital region and the ways that we can leverage our respective efforts as well. Indeed, if one looks at the latest announced initiatives by the Biden administration and aligns them with the US-ROK fact sheet, there is significant overlap and opportunity to further refine our respective as well as our shared efforts. The areas of focus identified by the two governments are fourfold: energy, infrastructure and development finance, digital economy, and finally good governance and civil society, and ensuring peace and security. Many specific programs and initiatives are identified within these four US-ROK cooperation categories for Southeast Asia. A second important element of US strategy and interest is to provide ASEAN and other regions, such as the Pacific Islands, opportunities not to be overly reliant on one partner in the region and leverage scarce resources with allies and partners to provide many high-standard, sustainable, and values-based cooperative programs. Again, there's much opportunity here for the US and ROK to align strategies and interests. However, as much as there are concrete avenues for US-ROK cooperation in Southeast Asia, and while it is fair to say that the US and ROK have generally aligned objectives for the region and for the countries of the region, as well as ASEAN as an organization, we should not underestimate the need for dialogue and coordination to sustain and fully leverage Washington-Seoul cooperation with regional countries. For example, US strategy and interests currently frame its Indo-Pacific approach as one of strategic competition with China. Southeast Asian countries and the ROK, not to mention some within the US, have less or more appetite for such a strategically competitive approach. The US approaches engagement with its ally ROK to support its strategic approach to fundamental issues of peace and security in the region in the context of a rising China, whereas ROK appears to approach its New Southern policy somewhat differently. Seoul seems to want to support the US Indo-Pacific strategy as an ally, but to do so in a way that does not directly challenge China. Seoul also frames its new Southern policy as a way of compensating for US-China tensions, for example, over tariffs, trade confrontation, and supply chain disruption. At the same time, the Republic of Korea hopes to gain advantages and benefits, especially in the commercial sphere, from increased interaction with large, developing, and growing middle-class countries across Southeast Asia. But depending upon the trajectory of US-China strategic competition, navigating US-ROK coordination vis-a-vis ASEAN will require great finesse. We can see some of the inherent tension even in the fact that the fact sheet on working together to promote cooperation between the new Southern policy and the Indo-Pacific strategy. Under the fourth pillar, for example, ensuring peace and security, Seoul and Washington noticeably focus on strengthening and expanding cooperation to support people in the region to overcome diverse, non-traditional security challenges, such as building capacity to counter transnational crime, respond to natural disasters, and protect the environment. Of course, cooperation in such areas would be excellent for the US-ROK alliance and certainly for the Southeast Asian countries and peoples themselves. But non-traditional security challenges are only a relatively minor element of what US national security strategy planners see as the strategic challenge of China's rise and the need for the US to work even more closely with allies and partners to address that challenge in key regions such as Southeast Asia. The US and ROK can straddle securitization by focusing on non-traditional security issues for now. But if strategic competition gets much worse, it may pressure the US and ROK to think and act more directly on traditional security in Southeast Asia. For example, if the PRC were to establish an ADIZ over its 9-dash line claims in the South China Sea. And even non-traditional security cooperation in these times has an aspect of competitive, if not confrontational behavior. And we've seen this on the responses to the global pandemic, for example. A second broad US strategy and interest is to further build out and create new institutions to address strategic competition. These are not substitutes for ASEAN, but additive to ASEAN. The elevation of the Quad to a leaders level meeting with increasingly institutionalized elements and the launch of the AUKUS arrangement with possible docking by other regional countries for specific elements and initiatives of Quad and AUKUS could draw in some Southeast Asian members over time. How the US and ROK coordinate these developments will be important to their alignment between the new Southern policy and the US free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. A related element to the utility of institutions to US strategy to watch will be how alliances between the US and other East Asian and Pacific countries calibrate cooperation towards Southeast Asia. The US-Japan alliance continues to develop strengths to address strategic competition, and given the importance of both the US and ROK, both the US-ROK and US-Japan alliances, as well as the critical need for US-Japan-ROK trilateral collaboration, it will be important to consider and manage US-ROK gaps in perception and policy vis-a-vis the alliances with Japan and Australia in particular. One of the strengths of the US-ROK alliance is the commitment to shared values such as democracy and human rights. But neither of these phrases and words appears in the US-ROK joint fact sheet. A normative basis for our shared efforts is important for political sustainability at home and signaling to both the peoples and governments of the region of Southeast Asia and beyond. Such normative principles need not be the center or lead of shared US and ROK efforts in Southeast Asia, but they cannot be absent. Take the case of Myanmar. Both the ROK and US since 2012 have provided support for the Myanmar government. But in the wake of the February 2021 coup, it is imperative that Seoul and Washington seek to work together and with other partners to address the democracy setback in Myanmar. This would be in alignment with ASEAN, given ASEAN's own recent decision to deny the junta full representation at the ASEAN summit. Finally, US strategy and interests places a premium on addressing the North Korea challenge. This challenge will dominate US-ROK alliance management, not only due to decisions and developments of North Korea itself, but based on the US-ROK alliance. While predictability on this front is impossible, regardless of who is elected in Seoul next spring, the need for Washington to prioritize management of the alliance in the context of North Korea will likely dominate. This has some implications for both countries in Southeast Asia, as many of these countries have had relations with North Korea. But that will be a relatively minor element of our US-ROK coordination and cooperation with Southeast Asia and ASEAN. So I come to the close of my remarks by simply saying once again, thank you for the opportunity to join this Sejong Institute Korea Foundation seminar on approaches to ASEAN and Southeast Asia. I thank you for your attention. I wish you all safety and health and happiness, and look forward to meeting before long in person. Good day.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Limaya. I think you made a very compact summary of the US-Korea cooperation on ASEAN. You saw quite many positive aspects of that, like some very close alignments of their objectives, as it was stated in our joint statement during President Moon's visit to Washington. And also you pointed to the potential limitations of Korea-US cooperation on ASEAN, for example, how then this cooperation will be implemented with the background of intensifying US-China rivalry, and also in its relationship with other regional powers like Japan, and also how they are going to deal with the normative elements like human rights or democracy, and also North Korea challenges. I think these are all very good topics for our discussions, but unfortunately, I understand that Mr. Limaye will not join us for the discussion. So I'm sorry for that. With that, then we will move to next speaker. We have Dr. Professor Ramon Pacheco Pardo, KFVUB, Korea Chair. VUB represents the Free University of Brussels, right? And Center for Security Diplomacy and Strategy, Brussels School of Governance. Professor Pardo, now you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much to the Sejong Institute for the invitation, as well as the Korea Foundation, of course. I'm going to be discussing the EU's newly launched Indo-Pacific strategy, and the core of the strategy really, which is deepening engagement with partners in the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, from a European perspective, we don't have a physical presence in the region. France would argue that it does have the physical presence in the region, but for the most part, obviously, Europe doesn't, and it's also a newcomer to the region when it comes to this more modern Indo-Pacific configuration. But what we have seen in Europe in recent years, and this has been very sudden over the past 3 years or so, is a tilt towards the region, not only from the EU, but also from key countries such as, for example, Germany, France, the Netherlands, or more recently, the UK, paying more attention to the region. This is, of course, to a large extent related to the US's and the Trump administration, the US's focus on the Indo-Pacific region, but it also has to do from a European perspective, from the growing number of partnerships with so-called like-minded partners in the region. And it's important to understand that if we look at the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific that was launched in September, so very recently, barely a month and a half ago, you see the focus on building partnerships with the countries in the region. But sitting here in Europe itself, I can tell you that the two key partners from a European perspective, if we leave, of course, the US aside, are Korea and Japan. for two reasons. A, they are like-minded partners, but B, these are two countries that have similar interests and values along with capabilities. So there are other important partners in the region, for example, Australia and India, and ASEAN as a whole. But if you look at the countries with which Euro sits the most potential for cooperation, we're really talking about Seoul and Tokyo. And I'm going to focus today on cooperation with South Korea in the context of ASEAN, because from the European perspective, ASEAN continues to be the central geographical area of focus in the Indo-Pacific region. And this is something that hasn't changed even as Sino-American rivalry has been growing in recent years. So the first point that the EU emphasizes in the Indo-Pacific is prosperity, especially the focus on resilient value chains, strengthening trade links, and reinforcing the rules-based trade regime. I think we are all aware that in the recent G20 summit, there was an aside with 14 members of the G20 to discuss resilient value chains. And of course, Korea was invited to the discussion. President Moon was sitting next to President Biden in the meeting. The EU was also part of it, but you saw, for example, the exclusion of countries such as China and Russia. I do mention this because even though the European Union claims that its Indo-Pacific strategy is inclusive, in practice, it is prioritizing cooperation with certain countries and others are being excluded. And most clearly, this is China. So South Korea fits in, of course, because of the investment of its Chaebol and other firms in Southeast Asia, your Samsung, your LG, for example, the presence of European firms in the region, and the fact that when it comes to these resilient value chains, especially in high-tech sectors, of course, Korean firms are leaders at the global level, semiconductors, biotech, electric car batteries. You have cutting-edge firms. So the EU sees the potential for cooperation with Korean firms in the countries in ASEAN that host factories, and in some cases, also research and development centers in these particular goods. Now, when it comes to trade and the development of a rules-based trade regime, the European Union sees the potential again for cooperation with Korea and ASEAN partners, because even at the height of the Sino-American trade war during the Trump administration, when the Trump administration was actively undermining the WTO, you saw, for example, the Moon government supporting the WTO. You saw ASEAN countries talking about the importance of the WTO for the rules-based trade regime. Other countries as well, of course, Japan, for example, Australia as well. So from a European perspective, the fact that these countries continue to support the WTO, even when it is being undermined by the US, means that there is a scope for cooperation in trying to maintain this. This also applies, by the way, to the fight against climate change, which of course is not only related to trade and economics, but is related to global cooperation. And you see the potential for cooperation with Korea there in areas such as green growth. If we move on to connectivity, we see how the EU and Korea are going to launch a bilateral transport dialogue in the coming weeks and months. This bilateral transport dialogue is essentially an infrastructure building, connectivity dialogue, focusing on the development of airports, railroads, roads, etc., etc. The EU sees the potential for cooperation with Korean firms, between Korean firms and European firms in the ASEAN region. Of course, Korean firms have a bigger presence when it comes to infrastructure development in countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, for example, than European firms. But European firms could be junior partners, for example, to Korean infrastructure firms. We see good cooperation, for example, between European firms and Korean firms in the Gulf region. You see a degree of cooperation, for example, in Latin America. So this could also happen in Southeast Asia in this particular area. And when it comes to infrastructure development, the EU is part of a number of countries, institutions that are trying to develop what we call open, transparent, and inclusive infrastructure projects. Again, implicitly, this is challenging China, that from a European perspective doesn't follow these rules. So you see again the potential for cooperation with Korea and other countries in the development of infrastructure under these terms. Then there are two areas of governance in which I want to focus on before moving to the last part of my presentation, which is security and defense. One of them is ocean governance. The other one is digital governance. These are obviously different issues, but from a European perspective, they are related insofar the rules-based regimes that we have in ocean governance and that could be developed in digital governance are being challenged. And again, from a European perspective, the main challenge is really coming from China. So if we look at ocean governance, the EU is keen in promoting the respect for the international law of the sea, as well as sustainable fishing. And there is a great focus on maritime security. So if you look at the EU Indo-Pacific strategy, the EU has made it clear that it wants to launch a so-called coordinated maritime presence in the South China Sea. This would basically be European navies coming together in the South China Sea and having a coordinated presence in the region. We have seen in recent weeks and months how the French, German, and Dutch navies have actually sailed the waters of the region. So the idea would be to have a permanent presence in the waters through these navies, other European navies that could be present there. And of course, this could mean cooperation, joint exercises, joint activities with the ROK Navy. This is already happening in the Gulf of Aden, where, by the way, there are also several Southeast Asian countries that have their navies as well and are cooperating with the European Union. So there is potential for doing this in the South China Sea. And in my view, it is likely that we will see this coordinated maritime presence in the not so distant future in these waters. When it comes to digital governance, the European Union would like to develop digital partnership agreements. There are three key target countries here: Korea, Japan, and Singapore. And the idea would be to have bilateral partnerships to universalize joint standards, to universalize stronger business links, to create resilient supply chains, the digital component of supply chains, and to promote cybersecurity. And through these partnerships, there could also be capacity building in Southeast Asian countries that would be willing to share their experiences and maybe learn from the experiences of Korea and the European Union. There's also scope for research and development cooperation between European firms and universities and Korean firms and universities as well in Southeast Asia or together with Southeast Asian counterparts. This would be done through the Horizon Europe program running between 2021 and 27. And last but not least, the European Union wants to have a security presence in the Indo-Pacific region. This is new, but you have a new European Union, a new Commission that wants to be more geopolitical, that wants to have a stronger presence in the security of different parts of the world, and the Indo-Pacific is key, especially in the areas of maritime security, cybersecurity, and human security. I have already mentioned maritime security. Coordinated maritime presence would be key here. I have already touched on cybersecurity, the idea of a standard setting. There's also cyber defense exercises. So, for example, Korea now is participating in a cyber defense exercise being organized by the Netherlands. This could be done at the European Union level as well. And there is also human security. From a European perspective, pandemic preparedness and disaster risk reduction are two areas in which the EU could cooperate with Korea. We have seen this, for example, in Afghanistan, where there is cooperation, there was cooperation in capacity building in Afghanistan, for example, in the police forces and the military of Afghanistan, and Korea was contributing a lot of money in this country. The European Union was doing the same, and European member states as well. So this could be done in Southeast Asian countries. So in short, the European Union sees Korea as one of the two key partners in the Indo-Pacific region, and it sees ASEAN as central to this region. Hence the potential for trilateral cooperation between Korea, ASEAN, and the European Union in this region in a host of different areas. I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pardo. I think he brought us to quite wide European perspective from the European Union to Korea, and also potential cooperation with Korea to ASEAN countries or regions in many areas, including economic and trade cooperation, value chains, and he touched upon the connectivity, infrastructure, construction cooperation, and also governance in ocean as well as digital governance, and also security, cooperation in security and defense. And also European thinking on the security presence in this wider Indo-Pacific region. How we can translate this potential into actual policies or into action, I think we can have some further discussions later. And now we move to third speaker, Dr. Sandeep Kumar Mishra. He's a professor at the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor, now you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Ambassador Cho Byung-jae. I'm really happy to participate in 2021 ASEAN-ROK Partnership Seminar organized by Korea Foundation and Sejong Institute. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to President Lee Sang-hyun, Dr. Choi Yoon-jung, and Lee Kyung-hee for inviting me to this important deliberations in which I learned a lot, apart from my own, you can say, opportunity to speak and present India's point of view on this issue. It's my pleasure, and basically I'm going to make my presentation through a slide, sharing my slides. And as you can see that the title of my presentation is that ASEAN and ROK in India's Indo-Pacific strategy, how basically India had been trying to achieve its goal of free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific through its Act East policy. So first thing I would like to emphasize that the goal of free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific had been there in Indian foreign policy for some times, actually. But it was formally articulated very clearly in 2018 by our Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And he basically emphasized inclusiveness. So basically he thought that maybe just free and open Indo-Pacific would not be enough. We can also bring in inclusiveness and some other, you can say, elements which are being discussed in later part of our discussions. Actually, when India looks at its goal of free and open, inclusive Indo-Pacific, India looks at actually through two routes. Two primary routes are, one is basically Quad route, another is basically Act East Asia route. And through these policy, we have been trying to articulate our goal of free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Actually, if you look at our goal of free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, you can see that there are actually roughly 3 layers of policies, Indian foreign policies, actually which are connected, and these 3 layers, they should be seen in you can say connection with each other. The first policy is our neighborhood first policy, in which the SAARC country, like our neighborhood 6-7 country, they are given very important priority. The second layer of our foreign policy has been this ACTIS policy, which was started in 2014. Earlier, the earlier version of this ACTIS policy was Lucas policy, which was started in early 1990s. And then the third layer is Indo-Pacific strategy. We want to work on all the 3 layers simultaneously. That's the goal of our. Why we are looking for this, or rather in last 1 or 1.5 decades, much more concern about free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. As you all know that India has been concerned about the rise of assertive China. The way China had been conducting itself in South China Sea, or say East China Sea, or say Belt and Road Initiative, or even in say Indian Ocean, that has been really a matter of concern for India. And we want that this region must be available for trade and other important economic and other activities. Because as you know that India is an emerging economy, actually because of pandemic, lots of disruption has happened. But earlier India was at one point of time, 2018, the fastest growing big economy of the world. So India wants that this region must be stable. This must be, you can say, the maritime trade and communication and other exchanges must be safe. They must be open. And that's why we have been quite concerned about, especially during Xi Jinping era, China's assertiveness. We have also bilateral contest with China on several issues. You must have heard about string of pearls. I will not go into details, but I think through different mechanism, India has a feeling that probably China is trying to encircle itself, India. In recent years, border clashes have been also quite frequent between India and China. The recent one, 2020, Ladakh region, we had a clash at Galwan Valley, and the clash is still on. Means basically India is really, so what we have to do, and that's why basically we thought about 2 different routes simultaneously working on. And one is basically this Quad route. Quad route, most of you are actually expert of this area. So basically we know that how these 4 countries, India, US, Japan, and Australia, they have been coming together. Actually, at one point of time, India was considered to be the most reluctant player in Quad. But gradually, it seems that India had been, especially last year, Galwan Valley incident, border clash between India and China, that led India to be much more overt in its support to Quad procedures. This year, I think 2 times, the top leaders, they have met in September 2021, in person. The Quad's top leaders, they met in United States. And India had been also trying to have bilateral deal with these 3 countries who are part of Quad. So I think this is the one route which we have been pursuing. But at the same time, we have been also emphasizing on our ACTIS policy. ACTIS policy, as I told you, that this is a policy. Actually, many people may be aware here. I think Dr. Choi had been studying about India and India's ACTIS policy. But I think most of you have been aware that ACTIS policy is not about only making India's Lucas policy more active, but this also basically, if you look at geographical scope of ACTIS policy, first time Indo-Pacific region was mentioned in that. So I think it's also another way to reach and to conduct ourselves in Indo-Pacific region. And we know that ASEAN is going to be very important and central, you can say. India had been part of, you can say, ASEAN plus dialogues and other, you can say, ASEAN led initiatives and deliberations, India had become part of, you can say, it became in 2012, became strategic partnership agreement with ASEAN. We are having, last year, we had, I think, almost $84 billion bilateral trade. We are also, in 2015, we announced something called SAGAR. It's called Security and Growth for All the Regions, all in the region, actually. This is basically an initiative by India, maritime initiative by India for Indian Ocean region. In 2018, I think ASEAN has also, actually 2018 ASEAN leaders, they were all invited to India as chief guests to our Republic Day celebration. This was a great occasion, and I think most of the leaders they met in person, and they had, you can say, long deliberations about our common perspective about Indo-Pacific region. ASEAN also, I think, had been talking about its own outlook on Indo-Pacific, and India had been talking about Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative. So several other, you can say, mechanisms have been there, like in maritime, you can say, naval, you can say, exchanges between India and Vietnam, Indonesia and Myanmar, they have been strengthened. And I think the four important focus areas overall, actually recently, I think 4 or 5 days ago, India and ASEAN joint summit meeting, it happened online, and both India and ASEAN, they emphasized that our Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative, and I think ASEAN's outlook on Indo-Pacific, they are having quite, you can say, similar, you can say, points, and I think we need to be working together on that. So this is a picture just to emphasize that, look, our Indo-Pacific policy and the main goal of Indo-Pacific policy, that is free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific, could be achieved by these two routes, and India has been simultaneously working on that. In the discussion, I will elaborate further in case that's required. When I look at India's approach towards Republic of Korea, that also I find quite, you can say, interesting and quite encouraging, because India includes Republic of Korea also in our ACTIS policy. Actually, overall, it seems that Republic of Korea is also in agreement with the goal of free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. And the only thing is that Republic of Korea wants that this goal must be pursued through its new Southern policy. Actually, in November 2020, new Southern Policy Plus was announced, in which public health and other non-traditional security issues were included. But Moon Jae-in government, they have introduced this idea of new Southern policy, in which ASEAN and India, they are going to be quite important, and you can say enough energy, enough, you can say, effort will be made to deal with these countries. So I think India's ACTIS policy and Republic of Korea's new Southern policy, it seems to me that they have both lots of complementarities. And that's why I think in both the approaches, we can see that centrality of ASEAN countries have been emphasized. Actually, in the recent, I think when Quad summit meeting happened in September, and if you look at the fact sheet, I will talk about that, then I think you see that lots of even Quad countries have been also saying on their platform that ASEAN centrality must be maintained. So I think Republic of Korea, they feel that ASEAN is important. They feel that their 3 Ps, peace, prosperity, and people, in their new Southern policy, they are quite similar to 3 pillars of ASEAN community idea. And overall, in economic and other exchanges also, ASEAN and India, ASEAN and Republic of Korea, they are quite connected to each other. I think it seems to me that both India and ROK, we feel that even if both of us, we feel that China's assertive behavior may be a cause of concern, but rather than being very confrontational with China, it's better to pursue it. India prefer activist policy and South Korea prefers its new Southern policy. So I think at the same time, as you know, that South Korea is a security ally of the United States, and India has been also, you can say, a formal member of Quad network. So we are having a bulwark of Quad network or American alliance, but I think India and South Korea, we want that ASEAN and this Act East route should be a better mechanism to ensure the goal of our Indo-Pacific strategy, that is free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. So I think it's a very, you can see in my conclusion, I can say that India wants that both the routes, Quad and Act East, must be simultaneously pursued. India prefers, in my opinion, to work on Act East Asia route, sometimes because at what happened in 2020, Galwan Valley incident was a border clash with China, that basically pushes India towards Quad more. But I think overall, India prefers Act East route to achieving its goal of free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. South Korea, I think it seems to me also they are quite, you can say, having similar opinion, and we have been working together on that. One point which also I would like to emphasize that, you know, as I mentioned in September 2021 Quad Summit, if you look at a document which was released officially, it's called Fact Sheet of Quad Leader Summit. And you can see the item, there are 3 pages, 3 long pages, means very, I think they have emphasized about health, infrastructure, climate, people to people, education, technology, cybersecurity, and space, and so many other areas. My point is that basically India has been working for their goal of Indo-Pacific strategy, that is open, inclusive, and independent Indo-Pacific. And they have been basically, even through Quad mechanism also, they are bringing the same issues, soft issues, and ASEAN centrality in that. The last point I will say that, but the problem is that India's choices between these 2 approaches, right now we are trying to do simultaneously, but if the Chinese revisionism or expansionist behavior, they continue, I'm not sure what could be the India's options in those situation of crisis. Overall, I will say that this India's Indo-Pacific strategy, or say America's Indo-Pacific strategy, Australia, there are so many Indo-Pacific strategy. And I feel that India has also 2 important mechanisms through which it can pursue Indo-Pacific strategy. Similarly, even South Korea, we say it, I think they have been saying it formally, sometimes we don't believe it, but South Korea has been also pursuing new Southern policy, and it could be their way to articulate their Indo-Pacific strategy. So I will say that it's a work in progress. India, South Korea, and several other small and middle powers of this region, they have to decide, they have to think about a third way rather than being, or rather getting it negatively impacted by great power politics, a big power clash in this region. I'll stop myself here, and I'm thankful for everybody to listening carefully, and we'll have further discussion in the next session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Again, I mean, you summed up India's approach to the Indian free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific, you know, very easy to understand way, I mean, in 3 categories. First, the neighborhood policy and Act East and Indo-Pacific strategy. As a prerogative of, we will come back to this subject later, but as a prerogative of moderator, can I ask just one question? Do you mean that your India's Act East policy mainly is regarding the ASEAN and Korea and Indo-Pacific strategy, including Quad, mainly to its relationship with Japan, US, Australia in terms of Quad?
I think, if you look at India's this ACTIS policy, we have actually, this is the third version. We had a Lucas policy 1, then Lucas policy 2, then this is the ACTIS policy. So almost 10 years each, actually, you can say. And in the first Lucas policy 1, the geographical scope was ASEAN countries. In the Lucas 2, ASEAN plus 3. So Korea was included in our Lucas policy 2, very clearly. And when we had this ACTIS policy, this was further enhanced to not only ASEAN plus 3 plus whole Indo-Pacific. So this is also our one Indo-Pacific strategy, which many scholars, I don't know why, but they don't try to carefully speak about that. This is also because if you read the document of our ACTIS policy, Indo-Pacific region is clearly mentioned. So this is one way in which through soft people-to-people contact, prosperity, creating connectivity, reaching out, improving our economic exchanges, through all these mechanisms, we want to achieve goal of our foreign policy. So that's one way to articulate our interests. And the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy, which is basically considered to be Quad, that is also another version. So I will say that India simultaneously working on two Indo-Pacific strategies rather than one.
So we can safely understand that your ACT-East policy and the Indo-Pacific strategy, there are a lot of overlapping elements in these two.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And now we've completed the presentation from three speakers. Now we will move to remarks from discussants. First, we have Professor Evi Fitriani, yes, from Department of International Relations, University of Indonesia. Professor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Good afternoon, everyone. First, may I thank the Sejong Institute for inviting me for this important discussion. I also would like to thank the three speakers for their interesting talks this afternoon. In response to their speech, may I start with ASEAN strategies in dealing with the key partners countries in Indo-Pacific. This is also ASEAN strategy to deal with external big powers that ASEAN have been done so far. First, ASEAN fully aware that their region, Southeast Asia, has been the battleground of big powers since ancient period. The region is not only geographically strategic, but also richly endowed by natural resources. So the big powers, the key partners now, come and go to exercise their powers directly or make alliance with the local countries, regional countries. So for ASEAN, having good relations and maintaining positive relation with all key partners is very important. And it is indeed it is a must, not only to maintain ASEAN unity, but also to pursue ASEAN long-term strategy for regional stability and prosperous region. So ASEAN need to deal and to maintain good relation with all of the partner countries. Secondly, ASEAN aware of current competitive relation among key partner countries, especially strategic rivalry between the United States and China, and understand that their conflict have created and will continue to create difficulties to ASEAN countries, both as ASEAN as a whole and also as an individual countries. So ASEAN, because ASEAN is made of 10 small and medium-sized countries, and we are not powerful alliance. We are made of small and medium countries. So ASEAN has strived to strengthen its centrality despite all of the intervention and influence from big powers. Given this reality, ASEAN strategy is to transform the cooperation, transform the competitive or the conflict circumstances or tension to be cooperation. Realistically, ASEAN may seem powerless in dealing with big powers, and especially because some of the even hegemonic powers. However, ASEAN can provide local or indigenous voices that they need to, that Southeast Asian countries need to drive their own matters, their own destiny, or even they need to talk about their destiny in their own region, and conflict among external countries should not to take place, let alone create a catastrophe for the regional countries. ASEAN can also ally with other partners such as Korea, India, the EU, and others to give alternative scenario of cooperation rather than conflict. This is where Korea is important for ASEAN because of several reasons. Korea can provide alternative partners for ASEAN. First, because Korea is not big power. ASEAN is a middle-sized power. So for ASEAN, Korea is not a threat. And Korea used to be also small country like ASEAN. In 1960s and 70s, the economic circumstances of Korea is very similar with ASEAN countries. So the experience of Korea to be now very economically powerful country can be a good example and role model for ASEAN. The second, Korea is also a very strong economy nowadays. So, and it is a very important economic partner for ASEAN. So in this case, Korea is very important as one of alternative major powers that can cooperate with ASEAN in addition to just two superpowers or two big powers, the United States and China. That's my remark for the ASEAN, how ASEAN deal with major powers. Now, let me respond to some pointers raised by our three speakers. I got a positive tone from Dr. Satu Limaye's speech, and there are many interesting issues in that. However, may I respond only to two points of his speech. First, Limaye mentioned about U.S.-Korea partnership in dealing with ASEAN or in responding circumstances in China. Has it been institutionalized, this ASEAN-Korean relation in responding? As far as I know, it is not. We have ASEAN +3, plus Japan, China, and Korea, but never ASEAN plus Korea and United States. So when Limaye mentioned about this and connect the discussion on ASEAN and then on Indo-China and then with collaboration with the US and Korea, I wonder how the US-Korean partnership works with ASEAN and what is the framework and the institutionalization of that kind of cooperation and relations. The second, Limaye's point to the values shared by US and Korea, which is human rights. This is very interesting for me because too often these normative values has been used by big powers when they talk about their foreign policy. And too often we also see this human rights argument have been used not only to protect, but also to punish other countries. And Indonesia is one of the countries that has been received this kind of punishment because of, in a quote, human rights arguments. In this pen, for me, discussion on this kind of normative issue is not real. We also have seen in this pandemic era how we all have observed that big powers have violated human rights because they're piling up the medical supplies and vaccines despite of so many needing people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So I think discussion on human rights and normative powers have to be put in a critical analytic because and we cannot just use this for the sake of pursuing other interests. The second, I would like to respond to Dr. Romano Prado points, especially when he mentioned that EU want to have security rules in Indo-Pacific. This is an important remark from you expert, because I have seen this interest. I have heard about this interest since 10 years ago when we have discussion with a lot of EU partners. The EU has been acknowledged as one of the key economic partners, economic powers in the world and also in this region, in Southeast Asia. But I think EU needs to work harder to earn its credibility as a security partners, because EU itself has a lot of problem also inside of the EU mechanism in security. So, and also I think EU security roles is needed more by the region closer to the EU, like Central Asia or Middle East, where the impact of the conflict and refugee have directly received by the EU. So adventuring in security roles in Southeast Asia and Indo-Pacific, I think will have some risk, especially because this area has been much more crowded with some big partners. Further question for me is, to what extent EU security roles will bring impact peace to Southeast Asia? Will it bring peace, more peaceful, or more conflict and tensions? The involvement of EU security roles in there. And lastly, to Professor Mishra, thank you very much for the explanation about the Indo-Pacific strategy. You explained quite detail about the plan and the mechanism, etc. My question is, to what extent this strategy had worked? What has been achieved by India through this Indo-Pacific concept that you just mentioned? Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador, for the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Professor. I think you raised several points and you raised several questions to the previous speakers. We will come back then after our final discussion. Director Gwen Beach Kok, sorry if my pronunciation is wrong. Now you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Excellencies. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, it's my great honor to join this discussion. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizers, the Sejong Institute and the Korean Foundation for inviting me to join this dialogue. And I also grateful for the three speakers and for Dr. Evi Fitriani for their insights and for very interesting questions, thought-provoking questions that Dr. Evi Fitriani gave. So after her questions, I have no more questions to pose. I just want to add some comments and some recommendations. So first, about the comments, I would like to echo the points raised by previous speakers about the convergence of interest between ASEAN, Republic of Korea, and other external partners, particularly the EU, India, the United States, to make this region a peaceful, stable, and prosperous region. And I think there is a huge potential for increasing coordination between ASEAN, ROK, and other external partners in order to achieve our common interests. And I think increasing cooperation is also a need for us during this time given the the big challenges that we are facing today. My comment here is that through all the presentations given today, I feel that somehow quite many people look at ASEAN through the lens of major powers rivalry. In my opinion, first of all, ASEAN should be seen as a contributor to peace and prosperity. ASEAN should be considered as a group of small and mid-sized countries which can contribute a lot to the peace and stability, first of all, and also with our labor force, with our potential, we can also, and we are decisive to contribute to common prosperity. If we look at ASEAN only through the lens of major powers rivalries, and in some cases, it is my own opinion, in some cases, some countries also look at ASEAN as a means to deal with or to compete with other countries. I think it is not a constructive way. For ASEAN countries, we always try to foster constructive cooperation. That's why I want to echo Professor Ramon Pablo when he highlighted a number of areas that ASEAN-ROK and other partners can work together. Here I noted that from the EU, beside the Indo-Pacific strategy, EU has some other initiatives like the Global Gateway and the EU's New Green Deal. And at the same time, Republic of Korea has successfully launched the P4G initiative. I think we should, to some way, synergize all these initiatives with ASEAN community building blueprints so that we can foster, so that we can, to encourage some productive and effective projects between ASEAN, European, and Korean firms in our region. I think, for instance, if we take connectivity, it is not only about railway or highway or railroad or maritime connectivity. It's also about soft connectivity. I mean digital connectivity or the people-to-people linkages, right? And here we need not only financial technology, but also we need cultural activities. We need people, resources, people who are passionate in improve people-to-people understanding between countries. I think it's very, very important, especially when it comes to the youngster today. I also would like to emphasize the analysis of Professor Mishra about the two ways that India pursued in Indo-Pacific. I really appreciate because he mentioned that both Arctic policy and New Southern policy emphasize ASEAN's centrality. In ASEAN, we understand very well that today it is a difficult time for ASEAN. If we mention COVID-19 pandemic, if we mention Myanmar issues and other challenges that ASEAN is facing today, we understand that it is one of the most difficult times for ASEAN. And we understand that ASEAN centrality cannot be taken for granted. It should be earned. And that's why ASEAN really needs the cooperation, the support from external partners to be, more resilient and more relevant in this region, so that we can contribute more to the region. I would like to add some more recommendations for cooperation between ASEAN, ROK, and external partners. Besides the areas mentioned earlier, I would like to highlight three areas that we need to focus on. First of all, I think health cooperation should be one of our highest priority today. Southeast Asian countries are struggling to get enough vaccine. And we also need to fundamentally improve our public health service. That's why we really appreciate the contribution made by external partners to ASEAN COVID-19 Response Fund. But at the same time, I think we need to be more and more proactive in collaboration, not only in fighting COVID, but also in preventing other pandemics. And that's why, for that purpose, ASEAN, Republic of Korea, and other external partners should work out some mechanisms of communications and joint actions in health emergencies. For instance, this year, the United States established the CDC, the Center for Disease Control in Southeast Asia, and one of the tasks is to promote a new CDC agreement with regional hospitals. I also noted that the joint statement between ASEAN and ROK issued on the 26th of October this year highlighted the COVID-19 pandemic and public health emergencies and response as the first area of the people pillar in ASEAN-ROK cooperation. So I think we can combine these initiatives with other external partners to better mobilize resources for health and human safety. We also need to accelerate joint research, health data exchanges, and harmonize standards of pharmaceutical products and medical supplies. I think many things can be done in this area. The second area that I would like to emphasize is the Mekong issue. Actually, many people already know very well that Mekong issue is a complex of multi-layer challenges. And a stable, sustainable, and prosper Mekong Delta have not only socio-economic impacts, but also security and strategic implications for the sub-region and for Indo-Pacific as a whole. That's why I very much appreciate the Mekong Han River initiative launched by ROK in 2019. And at the same time, I think we should synergize this initiative with other partners. For instance, United States, Australia, EU, because to deal with such a multi-layer challenges, we need technology, we need know-how, we need more knowledge and best practice so that we can help the local communities to adapt their livelihoods and to fundamentally improve the environment and the natural and also technological environment in this region. And the third area that I would like to emphasize is norms building. I think it is a cross-cutting area, and it's really important, especially amid the increasing major powers rivalry. For mid-power and for small countries, norms building is very important because it would help us to encourage to work out the new legal instruments which help to uphold international laws and which can help us to generate a rules-based order, a fair and equal environment for all the countries in the region. At this point, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I'm open for further discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nguyen. Yes, very good comments. Yes, one comment quite impressive was that ASEAN should own its centrality. Yes, that was quite very important. I think the same remarks could apply to Korea as well. I mean, if Korea wants to have some relevance to ASEAN and want to play some more important roles in the region, then I think it also has to earn its importance. And another one, Dr. Nguyen, you enumerated several key areas where ASEAN and Korea can strengthen its cooperation in vaccine and the public health area and Mekong area cooperation and the strengthen the rule-based orders. We will discuss this matter. Okay, we have come over, I mean, run through the all five speakers, 3 speakers and 2 discussants remarks from 5 of us. Now we will have some, as we said earlier, that we will open the floor for general discussions. We have about 40 some minutes. Before we open completely this floor to everybody, let's go back to a few questions which you discussants raised during this session 2. There were 2 questions raised by Professor Ebi Fidriani, and one category, actually two questions was for Satu Limaya, but as we understand, he's gone now, so he is not here, so he cannot discuss this matter. But if there is anybody, then I think can discuss this matter. And another one was your question about the EU, your comments on the EU, how EU's approaches to security cooperation with the ASEAN can contribute to the peace in the region, and what kind of security role the EU can further strengthen to earn its credit as a security partner in the region. I think on this question, Dr. Pardo can have some response. Do we have Dr. Pardo? Maybe I think we can go later. Then let's go to the policy recommendations made by Director Nguyen about the key areas where ASEAN and Korea can further strengthen their cooperation, vaccine and the public health cooperation in the Mekong area and the rule-based order. On this question, would it be possible for Dr. Lee Jae-hyun, you say some, make some response to this question made by Director Nguyen from the Korean perspective?
So the recommendation, the cooperation between Korea and ASEAN, on top of the issues you mentioned, I would like to add one more actually. Digital cooperation between Korea and Southeast Asian countries. If you look at the opinion survey done by Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore earlier this year, they published this a survey earlier this year. And there are, of course, the concern of Southeast Asian countries over the over-dependency on China for their 5G network. And I think it is quite an important issue because it is related to the data safety and cyber security. And at least commercially, if you are over-dependent on one supplier or one country, it is a way to reduce ASEAN countries' leverage against that particular country or company. So, and if you look at the survey result, quite a number of Southeast Asian respondents says that Samsung is one of the promising partner for 5G network in Southeast Asia. But if you look at the market situation, Samsung is not quite present other than mobile phones. Samsung is not quite present in Southeast Asia in terms of 5G equipment and network. So anyhow, the Korea and Southeast Asian countries can cooperate on the issue how to increase Korea's presence in the 5G network in Southeast Asia. It will definitely help commercially South Korea and strategically Southeast Asian countries. That's one recommendation. And I forgot the last recommendation that the Ambassador Joe mentioned from
cooperation to further strengthen the rule-based order. Was it
yeah.
right?
Yeah, that's right. Rule-based order is quite important, but the question is, who's ruler? The US, the Chinese, or the small and medium countries in the region? That is the main question. I mean, everybody today is talking about rule-based order, but nobody actually defines which rule and whose rule. Can we just trust either US or China to write the rule for the region, the regional rule for Southeast Asia and South Korea? That is the point that I mentioned in my presentation, that there is a potential area for cooperation as a small and medium countries in the region going beyond the US and China. We cannot just leave the big powers to write the rules for the regional countries. We have to get together and think about what kind of rule is the best for the regional small and medium countries. Actually, the rule-based order they are talking about was written in the immediately after World War II, which is quite old. At the time, the ASEAN countries and South Korea, both very poor countries, we didn't have the power to influence what kind of rule we will have. But today it's different. We definitely have our own voice in the regional rule. That's my response. Thank you.
Okay,
can I say something?
Oh yes, Ambassador Ong. Yes, go ahead, please.
Yes, because I have another board meeting to attend, so I thought I should give you share with you two of my ideas, and one of it is with regard to this question you just posed to Dr. Lee Jae-yong, which is about the comments from our lady colleague from Vietnam, Nguyen Bích Ngo. I think this idea of norms setting and rulemaking is where Republic of Korea and ASEAN can come together and do something. Because right now, we are looking at the UN process. There is an open-ended committee at the UNGA dealing with digital development, digital governance. Just now, Dr. Pardo mentioned that digital governance is something important to the EU. Therefore, I think Korea and ASEAN, we can get together to maybe find some common issues which are of importance to both of us. There are such things like cybersecurity and standards for the digital economy. Yeah, many of these issues are also now addressed at the WTO, but WTO is overly focused on international trade in the old world model. Yeah, so I think given the advanced level of development of technology and digital business and digital equipment, especially Samsung and a few of the other Korean companies, they are at the forefront of mobile telephone and mobile communication. ASEAN and ROK should find a way to select a few of these key issues, which will allow us to set some new standards on digital development and cybersecurity, as well as find some new negotiating topics so that we can contribute to the rulemaking at the digital economic platform. These are two areas that I think both ROK and ASEAN can work together. ASEAN has the huge market for digital goods and digital services. ROK has the huge capability producing the digital goods that the digital economy need. So we should now find a platform for both ROK and ASEAN going forward. How do we submit an appropriate level of commentary to the UNGA open-ended committee on digital governance and cybersecurity? Because we need to establish some of these basic principles. Yeah, and if you see the trend that is now evolving in Europe, in even China and America, they are talking about control of data distribution or data sharing, because they don't like data being mined or being tapped by all these big companies from different countries for their own commercial benefit. So I think there is a potential for Korea, Republic of Korea and ASEAN to at least come to some basic points, basic area of shared interest, and then we present this to the relevant committee at the UNGA, or even at the lower level, at the regional level, maybe at ASEAN +3, because ASEAN +3, we have Republic of Korea, Japan and China, and then we have Australia and New Zealand separately, ASEAN plus Australia and ASEAN plus New Zealand, because all of them are involved in the development of the digital economy. Right now, everybody talk about business. Very few people talk about what Dr. Pardo and Nguyen Big Ngok was talking about, which is to set the rules and the standards. These are something that we can work on. And I think it's worth pursuing this because the intellectual capability in Korea is there. You have people studying these kind of issues on digital governance. And there are European countries which are interested in working with Korea because there is this interest in technological product development and product application. So ASEAN come in because we have the big market. So we have the power pack in terms of the consumer potential and the consumer interest. So that's one area I thought ASEAN and ROK can consider going forward in the next round, because this is just a convergence of our interests. You have digital business and digital product. We in ASEAN have digital capability to use the product and to have the consumer helping to push a particular kind of standards and technology. The other point I want to make is that I think going forward, ASEAN to focus on education and skill upgrading, because this is something that many of our ASEAN member states need. We have the large student base, we have the universities and schools, but they are now becoming more and more out of steps with the real world development, which is basically very technological, very 21st century. So how do we come together and look for some basic platform for sharing of mutual learning, and especially with regard to the marketing of our products and our services? Yeah, we have a lot of workers in ASEAN. Yeah, Korea also have more workers than other similar middle power. But the thing is that the demographic changes are quite dramatic, in Singapore, in Thailand, we are already seeing the effect of aging and the small number of increase in population. We don't have enough babies now. So how do we now look at the existing population, existing educational institution, and existing educational cooperation platform that Korea and ASEAN have already established, and then work on developing some new area of cooperation? Ms. Nguyen talked about Mekong engagement. In Mekong area, there is going to be a lot of interest because of the potential in terms of economic, especially food production, and the population base, which is basically the middle class that is coming. So I think there are opportunity here for ASEAN and Korea to work on one or two doable, practical skill development or educational program. And maybe we can try it out, and then if it is successful, we can grow it and open it up. Thank you very much, Ambassador Todd. Good to see you, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Ong. Good to see you. Yes, Ambassador Ong's very practical recommendations, policy recommendations that ASEAN and Korea can further strengthen the cooperation, particularly in the areas of digital connectivity, cyber security, ASEAN market, how we can combine the ASEAN market and Korean capability in this area. That can be something we can further explore, and education cooperation. And again, emphasis on the importance of the cooperation on Mekong area. Yes, Professor Mishra, our three speakers, Professor Mishra is only one here, so I just want to ask you if you have any point to add to our discussion at this point. After that, we will have just, I will toss up a couple of questions, then we will complete after that.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. I would like to make a small thing which Dr. A.B. Phitriani asked actually about what has India achieved by two-pronged. My, you can say, idea is that in 2018, when Indian Prime Minister, because before 2018 Shangri-La Dialogue, most of the time, all the Indo-Pacific strategy versions, Japanese, American, Australian, and all, they were talking about free and open Indo-Pacific. So India introduced inclusive in that thing, free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. So I'm saying that basically, is, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's a work in progress. How basically we have to bring back centrality of ASEAN, centrality of small and medium powers, and how we could be the rule makers, whatever Professor E.J. Hun was actually talking about, that how we could be the maker of rules collectively rather than basically imposed by big players like superpowers. So I think in that process, a work in progress. So gradually we have to move forward and results are going to be visible after some time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor. We have just about 20 minutes. I'll toss up just one question as a moderator. In the session first, Mr. Gabi, he talked about Korean ASEAN kind of strategic balance between the intensifying Sino-US rivalry. I think this one was touched as well by Dr. Jita in her presentation. But Korea is basically in military alliance with the United States. So the strategic balance of in Korean concept might be a little bit different from the strategic balance of ASEAN. And maybe even within the ASEAN countries, the balance of the concept of a strategic balance might not be or same. For example, the strategic balance of Indonesia might be different from the strategic balance of Cambodia, something like that. So my question would be, can we say that there is a one or strategic balance of ASEAN, and how we can try to align the Korean concept and the ASEAN concept of strategic balance? On this point, Dr. Lee Jae-hyun also mentioned that the South Korea should further strengthen its the security component in its relationship with ASEAN. So I think we can talk about this one a little bit. I think anyone can now raise your hand and go ahead.
Ambassador Cho, can I respond?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, Dr. Chita,
Thank you.
please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that for ASEAN, there is no, probably no documentation about strategic balance. But if you look at the founding of ASEAN is based on neutrality, yeah, and keeping out foreign interference, outside powers from interfering in Southeast Asia. So what we are seeing now, as what a couple of the speakers have said, is that yes, we don't want to confine ROK ASEAN relations in the context of US-China rivalry. But the reality is, if you look at ASEAN and you look at ROK, one of the commonalities is the rise of China. So ASEAN centrality is very important for ASEAN, as well as bilateral relations between Seoul and ASEAN as an organization. Any changes or transformation to the idea of ASEAN centrality will have a tremendous impact on the interaction of ASEAN with all the external partners. So that is why I was saying that like the New Southern Policy. The New Southern Policy acknowledges ASEAN centrality. US acknowledges ASEAN centrality through the Indo-Pacific strategy. But for the US, I mean, this is my personal opinion, is that it is just lip service. But I think if you look at China, you look at Japan and South Korea, under the ASEAN +3, there are norms and practices that ASEAN follows, and ASEAN, the way ASEAN brings in outside powers is through its norms and practices. Example is the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. So for us in ASEAN, the strategic balance is more to neutrality rather than in terms of talking in terms of military, like it is for South Korea. Because the elephant in the room for South Korea is North Korea. Right? So that military component is extremely important. Economic component is important, but more importantly is the military component. That is why South Korea is sandwiched in between the US and China. For us, we are more worried economically. In terms of China being in every ASEAN country, all 10 countries have some project or rather in terms of the Belt and Road Initiative. So the influence of China is rising. That is inside ASEAN itself. Externally, the influence of America is rising through defense mechanisms like the Quad, AUKUS, which was recently established, and also Indo-Pacific. So that is one of the reasons why South Korea and ASEAN can actually work together to strengthen the ASEAN centrality, so that the agenda for ASEAN, the agenda for Asia-Pacific, the agenda for Southeast Asia is actually ruled by ASEAN and its allies, not by external powers. Thank you.
Yeah. At the first session, Mr. Kabi also mentioned that one of the common goals of ASEAN and Korea is the prevention of hegemonic power of any extraterritorial powers. And in this sense, I understand that there was a quite critical response from Indonesia when the AUKUS was announced. So my question would be then how the AUKUS or the strengthening of a militarization of US approach to this region is perceived within the ASEAN community. I think anyone can go ahead now. Yeah, Mr. Kavi, yes, please go ahead. Or we cannot hear you now.
Professor Chu. Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
okay now.
I want to build on what Kita has put forward. She made a very good point. But I think Korea has a very unique role in Northeast Asia. You don't see Korea as part of something, just stay in the Northeast. I think Korea has done very good job surrounded by major power and still maintain a high level of independence, just like Thailand. The reason why I said strategic balance is that we are ally of United States, and we still has been able to maintain good relation with China. So is ASEAN. ASEAN is a very good. I agree with Jita that neutrality, I think the word neutrality has been challenged by many scholars, but I do support that ASEAN has maintained this position all along. Country like ASEAN can prevent any hegemonic dominance in the region. So is the role of Korea in Northeast Asia. If you combine the two, then you can prevent major power hegemonic presence in East Asia. That I envisage it that way. And I think one of the area that I think, which I'm sorry, I have no chance to speak, is that in Mekong, Mekong region is a new area for Korea to display its own finesse in not only developing strategies, but also strategically engage with CLMVT. 10 years, Korea has learned the lesson how to approach. This is why I start my conversation that Moon Jae-in knew the weakness of ASEAN leader. You have to spend more time with the ASEAN leader in order to appreciate, in order to get cooperation. And that is the point. In the future, whether it's Ong Keng-yong, they're talking about digitalization, corporation governance, I think it will come. Now, and actually I'm very brave to say that ASEAN plus 3, Korea, you look at Korea 30 years ago, relation, 10 years ago, now it's completely different. Korea relation with ASEAN is nearly on par with the Chinese and Japanese. And in my paper that I submit to you, you look at the way you provide assistance to Mekong country. Look at the way you provide the Mekong Institute, which other country has failed. There are many other areas that you have discovered that this is the way. And I think it will all add up into Korea capacities to remain.
Yes.
That's always amazed me how Korea can, you
Okay.
are not following someone,
Okay.
completely. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, next, Professor Sandy Mishra, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cho. I think I wanted to make a small point because actually in the first session, we had discussion, and actually, if I remember correctly, Dr. Geeta mentioned about what is South Korea's position on South China Sea, or say US-China rivalry, or say Asian centrality. I think last point, it has been very clearly ASEAN centrality is very, very important, because if you look at 2017 onwards, new Southern policy, Korea has done enough to show that it's serious about putting ASEAN at the center of its approach towards Indo-Pacific. But about the other two things, as you are talking about ASEAN, that they don't want to take a very overt position on strategic and political issues. They try to be neutral. They don't want to be part of any strategic balancing, or say whether, because if you start talking about all those issues, ASEAN has all potential to get divided. Or say all the countries who are actually there, small and medium powers in this region, they are going to be divided if they talk about, if you ask this question, do you support China or do you support America or do you support? So it's better that basically the agenda item itself should be changed. And that has happened in last 2-3 years, it seems to me. I think in, suppose Quad Plus meeting, if you see, then more actually human security issue, health and other issues they have been discussing. Similarly, if you look at New Southern Policy Plus, again, public health and non-traditional security issues are being included there also. I think so. My issue is that be it climate, be it health, be it digitalization, be it cybersecurity, non-traditional security. So if we shift the agenda items, ultimately, then these small and medium players, ASEAN countries, South Korea, and even India, we can articulate a third way in this Indo-Pacific. If we keep talking about security and balancing and who is extraterritorial hegemony is not accepted, but regional hegemony may be acceptable, then I think it's going to create more problems. So my submission is that we, like say, as South Korea had been doing under Moon Jae-in, we don't need to talk about, we don't need to say that what is our opinion about, say, US-China rivalry, South China Sea. So I think if we are not able to remove ourselves from them, those issues and those, you can say, then we are going to get divided, and our whole third way, or our whole, you can say, approach to articulate a new ASEAN centrality and a new Indo-Pacific, you can say, rule-based order would be problematic. So I think we need to be careful about that. Thank you.
Just a straightforward question to you. Is the Quad, I mean, for India to join Quad, can we say that is a deviation from the traditional foreign policy line of diplomatic autonomy?
Yes, I think India used to say that actually for many years, India did have the same goal, free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific, but did not take side between China and US. I think India becoming more and more overt to Quad means basically an important shift in India's foreign policy choices. I do feel that.
Okay. Now, Dr. Lee Jae-hyun, you raised hands. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Actually, I got a couple of points here to, this is an answer to the question that they raised in the first session. And actually, Geeta mentioned South Korea is a US ally, military ally. Yes, that's true. We have a big problem here in the South Korean peninsula, and we need US presence in the peninsula. But if you look at the situation from a different angle, both South Korea and Southeast Asian countries are sandwiches. We are both squeezed between US and China. And if you look at Southeast Asian countries, you have US military allies like Thailand and the Philippines, and also you have close US security partners like Singapore and Vietnam. Actually, Vietnam and Singapore were mentioned in the interim strategic guidance, and Kamala Harris visited these two countries specifically. So we don't have much difference between Southeast Asian countries and South Korea. If the US and China clashes in the region, then in North Korea, we have, in Northeast Asia, we have two flashpoints, Korean Peninsula and Taiwan. And Southeast Asia, you have South China Sea. So we have pretty much the same strategic situation in between US and China. So there's a heaps of area we can cooperate together. And when you mentioned the neutrality, Southeast Asian countries are neutral between the US and China. Actually, there are two different types of neutrality. First, keeping the same distance from US and China. And I don't think that's the way for over Southeast Asian countries are doing. The second neutrality is engaging both China and the United States. That's what ASEAN countries are doing, and that's the strategy that South Korea is adopting toward both US and China at the moment. The ASEAN centrality issue is very important, but unfortunately, it's undermined by the big powers. If you look at China, I mean, the condition, the very important condition for the ASEAN centrality is the strength of multilateral cooperation, ASEAN plus the EAS and ARF and all that. That's where Southeast Asian countries are central. And China has been long investing so much in this multilateral cooperation, but they are gone. They have their own institution called Belt and Road Initiative. US, they tried to invest during the Obama period, but they are gone now. They have Indo-Pacific, they have Quad, they have AUKUS. That is the very important development that undermines ASEAN centrality. Okay, so time is running out. I'll stop here.
Actually, time is running out, and we have just several more minutes. Now then, Dr. Lee has finished his remarks, so I'll give just 1 minute to each of you from ASEAN countries, and if you want, Professor Sandeep Mishra, so that will take 5 minutes. After that, then I'll hand over my microphone to President Lee Sang-hyun for the final closing remarks. Okay, who will start? No further comments. Okay, then microphone to Dr. Lee. President Lee, now you close and then you wrap up and close, please.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Zhou. It's not really a wrap up, but I would like to say a few concluding remarks. Listening to this conversation, one of the valuable achievements of this seminar is that at least we could confirm that there are huge potential for Korea and ASEAN cooperation. I myself learned a lot about ASEAN and India's view towards Indo-Pacific and some of the common problems we face in this region. And having said that, I would say there are huge potential for collaboration and cooperation between Korea and ASEAN countries and India, because we face pretty much common challenges these days. We have a continuing COVID-19, and we see worsening US-China strategic competition. And because of that, we see weakening global multilateralism in most of the areas. So I would say this is a time that we need more multilateralism, both in global and regional level. But in today's seminar, we have touched upon many issues, many important issues. We have dealt with a digital connectivity, rule-based regional order, market, education, even Mekong area issue. So I would conclude that in the near future, perhaps in the next round of this kind of dialogue, we meet in person, face to face, and talk about a more broad collaboration. And also, I think through that kind of in-person meeting, we can build upon our previous network and much more stronger connection in this region. So as a president of the Sejong Institute, I once again, I appreciate all the excellent presentation and discussion held in today's seminar, and also generous support from Korea Foundation. I would like to thank with Dr. Choi Yun-jung and other staffs of the Sejong Institute who really worked hard to organize this conference. So this is my concluding remarks. And once again, I would like to send my deep appreciation for everybody who joined today's seminar. And I indeed hope to see you soon in person, either in Korea or ASEAN countries or India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You all done great job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good to see you, everyone.
이제 끄셔도 될 것 같아요. 네. 아니요.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.